They called her the Ghost of London, a woman so desperate to disappear that she wrapped herself in layers of wool, even in summer heat, choosing suffocation over exposure. But on one frozen December night in 1852, Lydia Hawthorne's carefully constructed invisibility shattered in the private drawing room of England's most powerful duke. What he saw beneath those suffocating layers would either destroy her completely or change everything she believed about survival, worthiness, and the cruel machinery of Victorian society. This is the story of a woman who learned that the scars we hide often hold more power than the masks we wear. If you're watching from London, Paris, New York, or anywhere in between, stay until the end to see how one moment of exposure ignited a revolution. Hit that like button and tell us in the comments which city you're joining from tonight. Part 1. The Woman Who Chose to Disappear. The Ashworth Winter Ball of 1852 was, by all aristocratic measures, a resounding success. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Women in silk gowns the colors of jewels, sapphire, emerald, ruby, drifted through the ballroom like exotic birds. Men in perfectly tailored evening wear discussed politics and profits with the casual confidence of those born knowing the world would bend to their desires. And in the corner, barely visible behind a potted palm, stood Lydia Hawthorne, 28 years old, unwed, unremarkable in every way that Victorian society measured worth. She wore gray, she always wore gray, or brown, or the muddy green that made her fade into wallpaper and shadows. Tonight's dress was a masterpiece of concealment, high-necked to the point of strangulation, long sleeves that covered her wrists, a heavy wool shawl wrapped so tightly around her shoulders and back that she could barely draw a full breath. The fabric was thick, suffocating, and absolutely necessary. Lydia had perfected the art of invisibility over 18 years. She knew exactly where to stand at every social gathering, never in the center where light would draw attention, never so far in the periphery that her absence would be noted. She had mapped the shadow spaces of London's grand estates the way cartographers mapped distant continents. She knew which walls stayed coolest, which alcoves offered the best concealment, which servants' corridors provided escape routes when the attention became unbearable. "Miss Hawthorne!" The voice cut through her carefully maintained solitude. Lydia's spine stiffened. She turned slowly, arranging her face into the pleasant, blank expression she'd practiced in mirrors since childhood. Lady Catherine Pembroke stood before her, resplendent in crimson silk that probably cost more than Lydia's entire wardrobe. Behind her, 3 younger women, debutantes fresh from finishing school, watched with the cruel curiosity of predators scenting wounded prey. "How unexpected to see you here," Lady Pembroke continued, her smile sharp as cut glass. "I wasn't aware your family had received an invitation." The lie was transparent. Everyone knew the Hawthornes attended every major ball, dragging their unmarried daughter like an anchor. They couldn't quite bring themselves to cut loose. "Lady Pembroke!" Lydia executed a small curtsy, keeping her shawl tight around her shoulders. "How kind of you to notice me." "Oh, one can hardly help but notice, my dear." The older woman's gaze traveled deliberately over Lydia's concealing layers. "Though I must say, you do seem rather overdressed for the season. It's quite warm in here, isn't it, girls?" The debutantes tittered obediently. "I find myself sensitive to drafts," Lydia replied, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heart. "Sensitive?" Lady Pembroke repeated the word as though tasting something unpleasant. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe it. Tell me, Miss Hawthorne, do you ever remove that dreadful shawl? Even in summer, I've heard, you insist on wrapping yourself like a corpse prepared for burial." The comparison struck with surgical precision. Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. She'd endured worse. "I have delicate constitution, Lady Pembroke." "Delicate," another pointed repetition. "How unfortunate. Though I suppose at your age with your circumstances, one must accept whatever excuse presents itself for remaining unmarried." There it was, the real blade, delivered with a society smile. One of the debutantes, barely 18 with perfect skin and perfectly cruel eyes, leaned forward conspiratorially. "Is it true what they say, Miss Hawthorne, that you've never once been asked to dance?" Lydia's fingers tightened on her shawl. Dancing requires a certain grace, she managed. I prefer observation to participation. How very diplomatic, Lady Pembroke said, and how very sad. But then, I suppose we can't all be blessed with the qualities that attract a husband, can we? Some of us are destined to decorate the wallpaper until our parents' patience, or their finances, finally runs dry. The words were delivered with such casual cruelty that for a moment Lydia couldn't breathe. Not because they were untrue, but because they were so devastatingly accurate. "If you'll excuse me," Lydia whispered. She turned before Lady Pembroke could respond, walking with measured steps toward the nearest doorway. Not running, never running. Running drew attention, created scenes, gave the predators the satisfaction of knowing they'd drawn blood. But once she crossed the threshold into the corridor beyond, her careful composure cracked. The hallway was mercifully empty, lit by gas lamps turned low. Lydia pressed one hand against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. The shawl felt like it was strangling her. The high collar of her dress cut into her throat. The tight sleeves restricted her movement until she felt like a prisoner in her own clothing, which, she supposed, was exactly what she was. A prisoner of the secret she carried, a prisoner of the past she couldn't escape. She moved deeper into the house, away from the ballroom's noise and light. The Duke of Vale's estate was enormous. She'd attended functions here before, always mapping her escape routes, always noting the quiet spaces where someone like her could disappear. A door stood slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond. Lydia slipped through it, closing it softly behind her. The room was a private drawing room, smaller and more intimate than the grand parlors where guests congregated. A fire burned low in the grate, casting flickering shadows across leather furniture and book-lined walls. The air was cool, blessedly cool after the suffocating heat of the ballroom. Lydia stood in the darkness, letting her eyes adjust. Then, with shaking hands, she began to unwrap the shawl from her shoulders. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. She drew a full breath for the first time in hours, feeling her ribs expand, her lungs fill completely. She let the heavy wool drop to a nearby chair, then reached back to unfasten the top buttons of her dress, just enough to ease the strangling pressure of the collar. Her fingers found the raised ridges of scar tissue at the base of her neck. She traced them by muscle memory alone, following the familiar landscape of damaged skin that spread across her shoulders and down her back like a grotesque map. The fire had happened when she was 10 years old. She remembered it in fragments, the smell of smoke, the roar of flames, the nursemaid's hands pushing her toward the window. Sarah. Her name was Sarah, and she'd worked for the Hawthorne family for 15 years, long enough to love the children in her care more than her own safety. Sarah had thrown Lydia through the window first, into the arms of servants gathering below. Then she'd tried to follow. But the burning timber had fallen, and Sarah had screamed, and Lydia had watched from the lawn as her nursemaid burned. They'd pulled Sarah from the wreckage, still alive, barely. The doctors had done what they could, but infection took her 3 days later. In her final moments, delirious with fever, she'd asked for Lydia. Lydia's mother had refused to allow the visit. "You'll only upset yourself, darling," Margaret Hawthorne had said, her voice distant and cool. Best to remember her as she was. But Lydia didn't remember Sarah as she was. She remembered her screaming. She remembered the smell of burning flesh. And she carried the scars Sarah's final act of love had given her, the burns across her back where falling debris had struck her even as she tumbled to safety. The doctors had saved her life. They couldn't save her future. "A girl with such disfigurement," her father had said, speaking as though Lydia wasn't in the room. "How will we ever find her a husband?" Her mother's response had been immediate and absolute. "No one must ever see it, ever." For 18 years, Lydia had obeyed that command. High collars, heavy shawls, layers upon layers of concealment, turning her body into a secret and her life into an endless performance of normalcy. She closed her eyes now, standing in the Duke's private drawing room, and allowed herself one moment of truth. One moment where she didn't have to hide or perform or pretend that the weight of her secret wasn't crushing her into dust. The door opened. Lydia's eyes flew open. She spun around, her hands automatically reaching for her shawl, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light, tall, broad-shouldered. For a moment, he was just a dark shape, a threat materialized from her worst nightmares. Then he stepped forward into the firelight, and Lydia's breath caught. Adrian Vale, Duke of Somerset, was 32 years old and considered one of England's most eligible bachelors, a fact he seemed to regard with the same enthusiasm most men reserved for tax collection. He had dark hair that refused to stay properly combed, gray eyes that held an unsettling intelligence, and a reputation for preferring books to ballrooms. He also, Lydia realized with growing horror, had a perfect view of her exposed shoulders and the raised, twisted scar tissue that spread across them like a grotesque web. For one endless moment, neither of them moved. Lydia couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her hands were frozen halfway to her shawl, her body locked in the exact position that revealed everything she'd spent nearly 2 decades hiding. The Duke's expression shifted from surprise to something else, something Lydia couldn't immediately identify because it wasn't disgust. It wasn't pity. It was something quieter and infinitely more dangerous, recognition. "Forgive me," he said quietly. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, roughened by what sounded like genuine regret. "I didn't realize anyone was in here." He didn't look away, didn't avert his eyes or make any pretense of not having seen what he'd seen. Lydia's paralysis broke. She grabbed the shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders with shaking hands, fumbling with the buttons of her collar. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate. The simple task of concealment that she'd performed thousands of times suddenly felt impossible. "Please," she whispered. "Please, don't." "May I help you with that?" The question was so unexpected that Lydia's hands stilled. She stared at him, uncomprehending. The Duke gestured to the buttons at her collar. "You're struggling. May I assist you?" Lydia's voice failed. Every rule of propriety screamed that allowing a man to touch her, to come close enough to see the full extent of her disfigurement, was unthinkable. But he'd already seen. The damage was done. "Yes," she managed. He crossed the room with unhurried steps, giving her time to change her mind, to flee, to do any of the things a sensible woman would do. Instead, Lydia stood frozen, watching him approach with the inevitability of an approaching storm. He stopped a respectful distance away. "May I?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he worked the buttons. He didn't flinch when his knuckles brushed the scar tissue at her neck, didn't hesitate or pull away. He simply fastened each button with the efficiency of someone who'd performed the task before, then stepped back. "There," he said softly. Lydia wrapped the shawl tighter, even though it was already secure. Her whole body was trembling now, the reality of what had happened crashing over her in waves. He knew. The Duke of Somerset knew her secret. "You're Miss Lydia Hawthorne," the Duke said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "We've been introduced before, several times, I think." "Yes." The word came out barely audible. "But you've never said more than a few words to me." "Because you're a duke," Lydia thought. "Because people like you don't notice people like me. Because until 30 seconds ago, I was successfully invisible." "I prefer not to draw attention to myself," she said instead. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "I've noticed. You have excellent taste in shadows. That corner in the Ashworth Ballroom, behind the palm, impeccable choice. Good sight lines, easy exit access, minimal foot traffic." Lydia blinked. "You noticed where I stand?" "I noticed quite a bit, Miss Hawthorne." He moved to the fireplace, adding another log with practiced efficiency. "For instance, I've noticed that you've attended approximately 15 major social functions in the past year. You arrive precisely 15 minutes after the posted start time, late enough that your entrance isn't noticed, early enough that your absence wouldn't be remarked upon. You never dance. You never participate in games or musical performances. You speak only when directly addressed, and even then you keep your answers to 10 words or less." He turned back to face her, and his expression was thoughtful rather than mocking. "I've also noticed that you're always wearing layers inappropriate to the season. Heavy shawls in summer, high collars even in sweltering ballrooms. And you have a particular way of holding yourself, very still, very controlled, as though any sudden movement might shatter something fundamental." Lydia felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the scars he'd glimpsed. This man had been watching her, studying her, seeing her when she'd thought herself invisible. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why have I noticed? The Duke considered for a moment. Because you remind me of someone who also spent considerable energy trying to disappear. Who? My sister. His voice went quieter. Elizabeth. She died 4 years ago. The past tense struck like a blow. Lydia had heard rumors about the Duke's sister, whispers of scandal, tragedy, something terrible that had happened before Lydia's family had moved to London. But the details had always been deliberately vague, the way society's most painful secrets always were. I'm sorry, Lydia said softly. She would have liked you. The Duke's smile was sad. Elizabeth was brilliant, far smarter than I'll ever be. She spoke 4 languages, could solve mathematical equations that made my tutors weep, and had the kind of strategic mind that would have made her an excellent general if she'd been born male. He paused, staring into the fire. She also had epilepsy. The falling sickness, they called it. Our parents were convinced it was a curse, a weakness that would destroy our family's reputation if anyone discovered it. So they hid her, built her a beautiful cage and called it protection. Lydia's throat tightened. She understood that cage. She'd been living in one for 18 years. What happened to her? She got tired of hiding. The Duke's voice was flat, drained of emotion in a way that suggested immense pain carefully controlled. One day, she simply walked out of the house and never came back. They found her 3 days later in the Thames. The coroner ruled it an accident. But you don't think it was. His eyes met hers, and in them, Lydia saw a grief so profound it made her earlier humiliation seem insignificant. I think my sister was 23 years old and brilliant and desperate to be seen as more than her illness, and I think the weight of our family's shame crushed her until she saw death as the only escape from invisibility. The words hung between them, terrible and true. I'm not going to tell anyone, the Duke said after a long moment. What I saw, your scars, that's your secret to keep or share as you see fit. Lydia's hands tightened on her shawl. Why? Because I learned from Elizabeth that forcing someone to hide themselves destroys them piece by piece. Because I've watched you stand in corners and shadows for long enough to recognize that you're suffocating. He took a step closer. And because I suspect that beneath all those layers and careful invisibility, Miss Hawthorne, you're drowning. The observation was too accurate, too cutting. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. I should go, she whispered, before someone notices I'm gone. Yes, you should. But he didn't move. May I ask you something first? Lydia nodded, not trusting her voice. When was the last time someone saw you? Really saw you, without the shawls and high collars and carefully maintained distance? The question struck at something fundamental. Lydia tried to remember, tried to recall the last time she'd been truly visible to another human being, not as a problem to be managed or a disappointment to be hidden, but as a person. I don't remember, she said finally. Maybe never. The Duke's expression shifted into something that looked like determination. That, he said quietly, is unacceptable. Before Lydia could respond, voices echoed in the hallway outside. Female voices, high-pitched and carrying the particular quality of aristocratic gossip. She's around here somewhere, Lady Pembroke's voice drifted through the door. Probably cowering in some dark corner like the pathetic creature she is. Did you see how quickly she fled when I mentioned her unmarried state? The debutantes laughed. Lydia felt ice flood her veins. She looked at the Duke, then at the door, calculating whether she could escape before they found her here. Alone. With him. In a darkened room, the scandal would be complete. Irreversible. Miss Hawthorne, the Duke said, his voice carrying a note of command that made her look back at him. Do you trust me? I don't know you. Fair point. His smile was sudden and surprisingly warm. Then let me rephrase. Are you willing to take an enormous risk based on the slim hope that I might be different from every other person in that ballroom? The voices were getting closer. Lydia had spent 18 years avoiding risks. 18 years choosing safety over possibility, invisibility over exposure. It had kept her protected. It had also left her standing alone in corners, suffocating beneath layers of wool, wondering if this half-life of careful concealment was really any better than no life at all. "What kind of risk?" she asked. The Duke extended his hand, the kind that might change everything. The door handle turned. Lydia looked at his outstretched hand, at the door opening, at the future narrowing to a single impossible choice. Then she did something she'd never done before in her entire careful, controlled, invisible life. She took the risk. Her fingers closed around his, and the Duke pulled her close just as Lady Pembroke and her entourage swept into the room. The older woman stopped short, her mouth falling open in shock. Behind her, the debutantes gasped in perfect synchronization. Lydia stood frozen, her hand still clasped in the Duke's, her heart hammering so violently she thought everyone in the room must hear it. "Lady Pembroke," the Duke said calmly, as though being discovered alone with an unmarried woman in a darkened room was entirely normal. "How delightful. I was just discussing literature with Miss Hawthorne. She has excellent taste in poetry." Lydia had never discussed poetry with anyone in her life. Lady Pembroke's eyes narrowed, flicking between them with the speed of a woman calculating scandal potential. "Poetry," she repeated, her voice dripping disbelief. "How intellectual." "Indeed." The Duke still hadn't released Lydia's hand. Miss Hawthorne was just explaining her interpretation of Wordsworth's later work. Quite brilliant, actually. I hadn't considered the political implications before, but she makes an excellent argument for reading Tintern Abbey as a critique of industrial expansion. This was madness. Lydia had no interpretation of Wordsworth's work. She'd barely read Wordsworth. But the Duke was spinning a story with such casual confidence that even she almost believed it. "How fascinating," Lady Pembroke said, in a tone suggesting it was anything but. "I had no idea Miss Hawthorne was so learned." "Most people don't," the Duke replied. "She has a remarkable talent for observation. For instance, she noticed that you're wearing the Pembroke diamonds tonight. Family heirlooms, if I'm not mistaken. The ones your husband inherited from his grandmother?" The sudden shift in topic caught Lady Pembroke off guard. Her hand flew automatically to the necklace at her throat. "Yes, they are family pieces." "Magnificent." The Duke's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I only mention it because I was admiring them earlier and recalled that the Pembroke family fortunes have been rather strained in recent years. Financial difficulties, I heard. Something about poor investments in railway stocks?" Lady Pembroke's face went pale, then red. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. The Duke was reminding her that he knew things, private things, damaging things, and that spreading gossip about finding him alone with Lydia Hawthorne might encourage him to share those things more widely. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Lady Pembroke said stiffly. "Of course not." The Duke's tone was pleasant poison. "Just idle conversation, rather like finding two people discussing poetry in a private drawing room. Nothing worth spreading rumors about, I'm sure you'll agree." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then Lady Pembroke's expression hardened into artificial pleasantness. "Naturally. Come, girls. I believe the next dance is starting." She swept from the room with her debutantes trailing behind like confused ducklings. The moment the door closed, Lydia sagged, her knees going weak. The Duke caught her elbow, steadying her. "Well," he said mildly, "that was invigorating." "You just threatened Lady Pembroke." Lydia's voice came out strangled. "One of the most powerful women in London society." I reminded her that information flows both ways. There's a difference. He guided her to a chair, waiting until she sat before releasing her arm. "Are you all right?" "No." Lydia pressed her hands to her face. "This is a disaster. If she tells anyone she found us alone, she won't. You can't know that." "I can, actually." The Duke settled into the chair across from her. "Lady Pembroke is many things, cruel, vindictive, professionally unpleasant, but she's not stupid. She knows that spreading this particular piece of gossip would invite scrutiny she can't afford. Her family is drowning in debt. One word from me to the right creditors, and the Pembroke estate gets carved up and sold at auction." Lydia stared at him. "That's blackmail." That's protection. His expression softened. Miss Hawthorne, people like Lady Pembroke survive by destroying those they perceive as weak. The only way to stop them is to prove you're not weak, or to ally yourself with someone who has the power to destroy them first. And you have that power. Unfortunately, yes. He didn't sound particularly happy about it. Being a duke means having access to information and influence that can ruin lives. I generally prefer not to use it, but for you, I'll make an exception. Why? The question came out raw. You don't know me. Until tonight, we'd barely spoken. Why would you risk your reputation, your connections, everything, for someone like me? The Duke was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those unsettlingly intelligent gray eyes. Because Elizabeth died believing she was alone, he said finally, because she thought hiding was the only option, and no one told her differently until it was too late. Because I've spent 4 years watching people like you suffer in silence while people like Lady Pembroke destroy them for sport. His voice hardened. And because tonight, I watched you stand in that ballroom wearing enough wool to survive an Arctic expedition, suffocating rather than risk someone seeing your scars. And I decided I was done letting that be acceptable. Lydia felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked and frozen for so long she'd forgotten it existed. Hope. Terrible, dangerous, completely irrational hope. What are you suggesting? She whispered. The Duke leaned forward, his expression intent. I'm suggesting, Miss Hawthorne, that you're drowning in a cage built by other people's fear and shame, and I'm offering you a way out. The clock struck midnight as Lydia finally returned to the ballroom. She'd stayed with the Duke for another 20 minutes, listening to him explain his plan with the methodical precision of a general mapping battle strategy. It was insane. Impossible. Everything she'd been taught to avoid. And yet, her parents found her near the refreshment table, where she'd positioned herself to appear as though she'd been there all along. Lydia, her mother's voice was sharp. Where have you been? Margaret Hawthorne was 52 years old and beautiful in the way expensive maintenance and rigid self-discipline could create. Her hair was perfectly arranged, her gown expertly fitted, her expression carefully neutral in the way that suggested volumes of controlled disapproval. I needed air, Mother. Air! Margaret's eyes swept over Lydia's appearance, checking for anything amiss, any sign of impropriety. You look flushed. Are you feeling unwell? I'm fine. Her father appeared at Margaret's elbow, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. Richard Hawthorne was a successful merchant, wealthy but not aristocratic, always striving to climb higher on society's ladder and always falling just short. There you are, he said to Lydia, though his tone suggested he'd barely noticed her absence. Your mother and I have been discussing your situation. Lydia's stomach clenched. These discussions never ended well. What situation, Father? Richard exchanged a look with Margaret, the kind of loaded glance that conveyed entire conversations in a single moment. You're 28 years old, Lydia, unmarried, no prospects. Your mother and I have been patient, but our patience has limits. I see. Do you? Margaret's voice was ice. Because from where I stand, it appears you've given up entirely. You make no effort to attract attention. You refuse to participate in activities that might introduce you to suitable men, and you persist in wearing those dreadful heavy clothes that make you look like you're in permanent mourning. The criticism was nothing new. Lydia had heard variations of it for years, but tonight, with the Duke's words still echoing in her mind, it landed differently. The clothes are necessary, she said quietly. The clothes are hideous, Margaret corrected, and they're costing your father a fortune in fabric. Do you have any idea how much wool you go through in a year? I'm aware, Mother. Are you? Richard's voice rose slightly. Are you aware that we've spent 18 years funding your social season? 18 years of dresses and balls and introductions, and what do we have to show for it? Nothing. Not a single proposal, not even a dance. Around them, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Lydia felt the familiar heat of shame crawl up her neck, but beneath it, something else stirred. Anger. Perhaps, she said, keeping her voice level, if you'd allowed me to actually be myself instead of demanding I hide. Hide? Margaret's laugh was sharp enough to cut. We've protected you, Lydia. given you opportunities to build a life despite your condition, and you've squandered every single one. My condition? Lydia repeated the words flatly. You mean my scars? Margaret's face went white. Richard's hand tightened on his champagne glass. Lower your voice, her mother hissed. Do you want everyone to know? Know what? That I was burned as a child? That Sarah died saving my life? That you've spent 18 years acting as though my survival was somehow shameful? The words were out before Lydia could stop them. 18 years of silence cracking open all at once. Richard grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh through the layers of fabric. That is enough. His voice was low and furious. You will not create a scene. You will not embarrass this family further. You will keep your voice down and your secrets hidden, or so help me. Or what, Father? Lydia heard herself say. You'll disown me? Send me away? Lock me in my room until I learn to be appropriately grateful for the cage you've built? How dare you? Margaret's voice shook with rage. After everything we've sacrificed for you, the money, the effort, the absolute humiliation of dragging you to event after event while you stand in corners like some pathetic ghost, then stop. The words came out flat and final. Stop bringing me. Stop funding my season. Stop pretending that any of this is for my benefit when all you really want is for me to disappear. Her parents stared at her as though she'd grown a second head. You ungrateful, Richard started. Miss Hawthorne. The voice cut through the tension like a blade. The Duke of Somerset stood 3 feet away, his expression pleasant and entirely unconcerned with the family drama unfolding before him. Your Grace. Richard's anger transformed instantly into obsequious courtesy. I apologize, we were just having a private conversation, I see. The Duke's smile didn't waver. How unfortunate that I must interrupt. Miss Hawthorne, I believe you promised me this dance. Lydia's mind went blank. She'd promised nothing of the sort. She didn't dance. Everyone knew she didn't dance. But the Duke was extending his hand with the same calm certainty he'd shown in the drawing room. Another choice. Another impossible risk. Margaret recovered first. I'm afraid Lydia doesn't... I'd be delighted, Lydia said, placing her hand in the Duke's. Her mother's face went from white to red. Richard looked like he might actually have a stroke. The Duke led Lydia toward the dance floor, his stride unhurried, giving her time to adjust, to change her mind, to panic. I can't dance, she whispered urgently. You can stand and sway, he replied calmly. I'll do the rest. The music began, a waltz, elegant and slow. The Duke positioned them properly, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. Through the layers of her shawl and dress, Lydia felt the warmth of his palm. Just follow me, he said softly. Trust me. Trust, that impossible word again. They moved together, and Lydia discovered he was right. She didn't need to know the steps. The Duke guided her with subtle pressure, leading her through the basic movements with enough skill that her inexperience became irrelevant. Around them, the ballroom watched. Lydia felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, all focused on the impossible sight of the ghost of London dancing with a duke. They're all staring, she breathed. Let them. The Duke's voice was steady. Let them stare and wonder and gossip, because tomorrow, Miss Hawthorne, everything changes. What do you mean? His gray eyes met hers, and in them Lydia saw something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Certainty. I mean, he said quietly, that I'm going to ask your father for permission to court you. And when he gives it, and he will, because refusing a duke is social suicide, I'm going to spend the next 3 months proving to you that hiding is a choice, not a necessity. Lydia's steps faltered. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. You don't even know me. Then we'll get to know each other. The Duke spun her gently, bringing her back into position. I suspect it will be considerably more interesting than anything else I had planned for the spring season. This is madness. Perhaps. His smile was quiet and genuine, but I promised Elizabeth's memory that I would never again stand by and watch someone suffocate in a cage built by shame. You, Miss Hawthorne, are suffocating, and I find I can't tolerate it. The music swelled, carrying them through the final measures of the waltz. When it ended, the Duke bowed formally. Lydia curtsied, her mind still reeling. "I'll call on your family tomorrow," he said. "Prepare yourself for considerable chaos." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd before Lydia could formulate a response. She stood alone on the dance floor, aware of the hundreds of eyes still watching her, waiting for her to retreat to her customary shadows. Instead, for the first time in 18 years, Lydia Hawthorne stayed exactly where she was, visible, exposed, and absolutely terrified. But perhaps, she thought, terror was better than slow suffocation. Perhaps choosing to be seen was its own form of survival. The ballroom's whispers rose around her like a tide, but Lydia barely heard them. She was too busy trying to remember how to breathe in a world that had suddenly, impossibly, become larger than the corners and shadows where she'd learned to disappear. Part 2. Louis Ory viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, phá hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề sinh tồn hoặc môi trường khắc nghiệt, nhân vật chính tiếp tục bị cộng đồng nghi ngờ, coi thường hoặc chống đối. Nhân vật đưa ra một quyết định táo bạo hoặc giải pháp khác thường làm xung đột leo thang. Tình huống phải khó khăn hơn phần trước và đẩy nhân vật vào nguy cơ lớn hơn. Tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phủ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính, không viết lan man. Mỗi phần phải có một cao trào nhỏ, mini climax trước khi kết thúc, không được recap hoặc nhắc lại quá khứ dài dòng. Kết thúc phần bằng một điểm dùng kịch tính nhưng không giới thiệu phần sau. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa, lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn, không nhảy sang document. Chi dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật. Theo ghi chép, hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự, tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more muy bonzo, muy bon foot. Part 2. Two Wounded Strangers. The Duke of Somerset arrived at the Hawthorne residence at precisely 2 o'clock the following afternoon, driving a carriage so elegant it made their modest townhouse look like a gardener's cottage. Lydia watched from her bedroom window as he descended, dressed in formal calling attire that probably cost more than her father's annual income. The servants were in chaos below. She could hear her mother's sharp voice issuing commands, her father's nervous pacing in the entrance hall. No one had told Lydia he was coming. No one had asked her permission. They'd simply informed her at breakfast that the Duke of Somerset had sent word of his intention to call, and that she would make herself presentable immediately. "Wear the blue dress," her mother had commanded, "the one with the high collar, and for heaven's sake, do something with your hair." Now Lydia sat in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection with a kind of detached horror. The blue dress was stiff and uncomfortable, the collar so tight it left red marks on her skin. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that required enough pins to build a small fence. The shawl draped across her shoulders was new, purchased hastily that morning by a servant sent running to the dressmaker. She looked like a doll, carefully posed, completely artificial. A knock sounded at her door. "Miss Lydia?" The housekeeper's voice was breathless. "The Duke is asking for you in the parlor." Lydia stood slowly, her hands smoothing the stiff fabric of her dress. Her reflection stared back at her, a stranger wrapped in expensive concealment, about to meet a man who'd already seen the truth beneath the layers. The parlor had been transformed overnight. Every surface gleamed. Fresh flowers crowded every available vase. Her parents sat ramrod straight on the settee, wearing their best clothes and most artificial smiles. The Duke stood by the window, examining a rather unfortunate landscape painting her mother had purchased at auction. He turned when Lydia entered, and something in his expression shifted, a flicker of what might have been disappointment. "Miss Hawthorne," he bowed formally. "Thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace." Lydia curtsied, the movement stiff and awkward in her elaborate dress. "Please sit." Her father gestured to a chair positioned directly across from the Duke. The arrangement was transparently strategic, close enough for conversation, far enough for propriety, positioned so her parents could observe every interaction. Lydia sat. The Duke settled into his own chair with the easy grace of someone accustomed to being watched. "Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Hawthorne." The Duke's tone was pleasant, professional. "I appreciate you allowing me this visit. I realize it's somewhat irregular, given that your daughter and I have only recently become acquainted." "Not irregular at all, Your Grace." Richard's voice carried the oily quality of excessive courtesy. "We're honored by your attention to our Lydia." "Our Lydia?" As though she were property to be transferred. "I wanted to speak with you about the possibility of formally courting Miss Hawthorne," the Duke continued. "With your permission, naturally." Margaret's hands tightened on her teacup. "May I ask, Your Grace, what prompted this interest? Lydia is not. That is, she hasn't typically attracted attention from gentlemen of your stature." The subtle insult hung in the air. The Duke's expression didn't change. "Your daughter," he said calmly, "is one of the most observant people I've ever encountered. She notices things others miss. Details, patterns, the kind of intelligence that suggests a mind worth knowing." Lydia's heart stuttered. He was describing someone else, some version of her that didn't actually exist. How flattering. Margaret's smile was brittle. Though, I must say, Lydia has always been rather quiet, reserved, some might say excessively so. "I prefer thoughtful to performative," the Duke replied. "In my experience, those who speak least often think most." Richard leaned forward. "Your Grace, forgive my directness, but I must ask, what are your intentions toward our daughter? A courtship implies expectations." "My intentions are honorable, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm interested in knowing your daughter better, in determining whether we might suit each other as companions." "Companions." Margaret repeated the word as though tasting something sour. "Not marriage?" "Marriage would be the natural conclusion of a successful courtship, yes." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Lydia saw her parents exchange another loaded glance, the kind that conveyed volumes of unspoken calculation. "Your Grace," Richard said carefully, "I feel obligated to inform you of certain circumstances regarding Lydia, things that might affect your decision to pursue this courtship." "No." Lydia's hands clenched in her lap. "No, Father, don't." "Lydia suffered an accident as a child," Richard continued, his voice taking on the rehearsed quality of a speech delivered many times. "A fire. She was burned. The scarring is extensive. Hidden, of course, but permanent. We've always been honest with potential suitors about this fact." Potential suitors. Plural, as though there had been dozens instead of zero. The Duke's expression remained neutral. "I'm aware of Miss Hawthorne's scars." The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret's teacup rattled against its saucer. "You're aware?" "Yes." The Duke's gaze shifted to Lydia, and in his eyes she saw understanding. "We discussed it last night. Miss Hawthorne was kind enough to share something deeply personal with me, and I appreciated her trust." The lie was smooth, delivered with perfect conviction. Lydia felt something loosen in her chest. "I see." Richard's voice was strangled. "And this doesn't concern you? Why would it?" The Duke's tone suggested genuine confusion. "Scars are evidence of survival, Mr. Hawthorne. They indicate that Miss Hawthorne has already faced difficulty and persevered. I find that admirable rather than disqualifying." Margaret looked like she might faint. Richard's face had gone an alarming shade of red. "Your Grace," her mother managed, "I don't think you understand the extent—" "Mrs. Hawthorne." The Duke's voice remained pleasant, but something in it suggested steel beneath silk. "I understand perfectly. Your daughter carries physical scars from a childhood trauma. This fact does not diminish her worth, her intelligence, or her suitability as a companion. If you believe otherwise, then I respectfully suggest the problem lies not with Miss Hawthorne, but with those who've chosen to view her scars as shameful rather than honorable." The rebuke was delivered so smoothly that for a moment Lydia's parents didn't seem to register it. Then Richard's expression hardened. "With all due respect, Your Grace, you don't know what it's been like. 18 years of managing this situation, protecting Lydia from gossip, from ridicule, from the kind of cruelty society reserves for those who are different. Protecting? The Duke's eyebrow rose fractionally. Or hiding? I beg your pardon? I'm simply clarifying the distinction, Mr. Hawthorne. Protection implies shielding someone from genuine harm. Hiding implies shame. From where I sit, it appears you've spent 18 years convincing your daughter that her survival was something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. Richard stood abruptly. How dare you come into my home and— Father, Lydia's voice cut through the rising tension. Stop. Everyone turned to stare at her. Lydia rarely spoke during these parental discussions. She certainly never interrupted. She stood slowly, her heart hammering but her voice steady. The Duke is correct. You haven't protected me. You've imprisoned me. She met her father's shocked gaze. And I'm done pretending otherwise. Margaret's face went white. Lydia, I'm 28 years old, Mother. An adult. I've spent 18 years obeying your commands, hiding my scars, making myself invisible because you convinced me that was the only way to survive. Her voice grew stronger. But I'm not surviving, I'm suffocating, and I won't do it anymore. You ungrateful— Richard started. Mr. Hawthorne. The Duke's voice was quiet but absolute. I suggest you sit down and listen to your daughter. She's been remarkably patient with you. I wouldn't test that patience further. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Richard sat, his face mottled with rage. Lydia turned to the Duke, and for the first time since entering the room, she felt like she could breathe. Your Grace, I accept your proposal to court me. On one condition. His expression showed approval. Which is? That you understand I have no idea who I am beneath all these layers of concealment. No idea what I like, what I want, what kind of person I might be if I'm allowed to exist without constant shame. She swallowed hard. I can't promise to be a suitable companion. I can only promise to try. The Duke's smile was genuine and unexpectedly warm. Miss Hawthorne, I would argue that self-awareness and honesty are considerably more valuable than suitability. You're already more interesting than half the people I know. Then we have an arrangement? We do. He stood, crossing to her side. With your parents' permission, of course. All eyes turned to Richard and Margaret. Lydia watched her father's face cycle through emotions. Anger, calculation, reluctant acceptance. Refusing a Duke's courtship was social suicide, but allowing it meant acknowledging that their carefully maintained control over Lydia was ending. Very well, Richard said finally. The words dragged from him like teeth. You have our permission, Your Grace. Excellent. The Duke offered Lydia his arm. Then perhaps Miss Hawthorne would join me for a walk in the garden. Properly chaperoned, naturally. Margaret stood so quickly her teacup clattered. I'll accompany you. Actually, the Duke said smoothly, I was thinking the housekeeper would be sufficient. Unless you don't trust your daughter's judgment, Mrs. Hawthorne. Another trap, neatly laid. Refusing would suggest they didn't trust Lydia. Accepting meant relinquishing control. Margaret's smile was poisonous. Of course we trust Lydia. Mrs. Davies, please accompany them. The housekeeper materialized from the hallway, her expression carefully neutral. Lydia took the Duke's arm, and together they walked out of the parlor, leaving her parents' fury behind. The garden was small but well-maintained, with gravel paths winding between winter-bare rose bushes. The housekeeper stationed herself near the house, far enough to provide the illusion of privacy. That, the Duke said conversationally, was magnificently done. Lydia's hands were shaking on his arm. I've never spoken to them like that before. I noticed. Your father looked like you'd grown a second head. He's going to make me pay for it later. The Duke's expression darkened. If your father retaliates in any way, I want you to tell me immediately. Why would you care? He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Because I meant what I said in the parlor. You deserve better than imprisonment disguised as protection. And because watching you stand up to them just now reminded me of Elizabeth before our parents broke her. The grief in his voice was raw enough that Lydia felt it like a physical blow. Tell me about her, she said softly. Really tell me, not just the parts that hurt. The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Then he began walking again, his pace slow and measured. Elizabeth was 3 years younger than me. She had red hair, proper copper red, not auburn, and freckles she hated. She could solve complex mathematical equations before most children learned to read. Our tutors were terrified of her. His smile was sad but genuine. She used to follow me everywhere when we were children. Drove me mad, actually. I'd be trying to study or ride or fence, and she'd appear like a ghost, demanding I explain whatever I was doing. But she'd remember everything, one conversation, and she'd have mastered concepts that took me weeks to understand. She sounds brilliant, Lydia said. She was. Too brilliant for the cage our parents built. His voice hardened. The epilepsy started when she was 12. The first seizure happened during a dinner party. 20 aristocrats watched my sister collapse, watched her body convulse, watched her lose control of herself completely. Lydia winced. Our parents were mortified, not worried, not concerned for Elizabeth, mortified. They dragged her upstairs, called in doctors who prescribed useless treatments, then made a decision. Elizabeth would be kept at home. Private tutors only, no more social events, no more risk of public embarrassment. They hid her. They erased her. The Duke's jaw clenched. They took a brilliant, vibrant girl and locked her in a gilded cage, telling her it was for her own good, for her safety, for the family's reputation. How long? 11 years. From 12 to 23. 11 years of Elizabeth slowly disappearing inside that house, her brilliance wasted, her potential destroyed because our parents were more concerned with avoiding scandal than with their daughter's happiness. The pain in his voice made Lydia's chest ache. What happened at the end? I was traveling on the continent, the Duke said quietly. Business matters I couldn't avoid. Elizabeth sent me letters. Happy letters, or so I thought. She wrote about books she was reading, problems she was solving. Everything seemed fine. He paused, staring at the bare rose bushes. The last letter arrived 3 days after she died. In it, she apologized. Said she was tired of being invisible, tired of feeling like a burden and a shame. She thanked me for being the only person who still saw her as human rather than as an illness to be managed. Did they ever find out why she went to the Thames? The official story was that she went for a walk and slipped. Tragic accident, but I found her diary afterward. The entries made it clear she was planning it. She wrote about feeling like a ghost in her own life, about wondering if anyone would even notice if she simply stopped existing. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it, should have recognized the signs, should have done something. His hands clenched at his sides. Instead, I was across Europe, blissfully unaware that my sister was drowning in loneliness and shame. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? He turned to face her and his expression was anguished. I knew what our parents were doing to her. I knew how the hiding was destroying her. But I was young and selfish and convinced that Elizabeth was strong enough to endure until I could figure out how to help her. I was wrong. Lydia reached out instinctively, placing her hand over his. The gesture was improper, but she didn't care. Your sister didn't die because you failed her, she said firmly. She died because your parents convinced her she was shameful, because society told her that her illness made her less than human, because she was suffocating in a cage and saw death as the only escape. None of that was your fault. The Duke stared at their joined hands. You sound very certain. I am, because I've spent 18 years in a similar cage, and I understand exactly how it destroys you piece by piece. The difference is that I'm still alive, still have a choice, and partly because of Elizabeth's story, I'm choosing differently. What are you choosing? Lydia took a deep breath. To be seen, to stop hiding, to find out who I am when I'm not constantly performing invisibility. Something shifted in the Duke's expression, grief giving way to determination. Then we'll discover it together, he said, on one condition, which is that you call me Adrian, at least when we're alone. All this Your Grace formality makes me feel like I'm addressing Parliament. Lydia felt a smile tug at her lips. Adrian, better. His own smile was warm. And I'll call you Lydia if you permit it. I permit it. They stood together in the winter garden, hands still joined, the housekeeper watching from a discreet distance. Around them, London's endless noise created a backdrop of distant sound. Carriages, vendors, the persistent hum of a city that never quite stopped moving. "Adrian," Lydia said carefully, "what happens now? With this courtship?" "Now," he replied, "I take you places. Introduce you to people who won't judge you for your scars. Show you that the world is considerably larger than the corners and shadows you've been living in." That sounds terrifying. It will be. But you'll have me as your guide, and I promise, Lydia, I won't let you drown. The conviction in his voice made something warm unfurl in Lydia's chest. Hope, she realized, actual, genuine hope that her life might be more than suffocation and shame. "I'll hold you to that promise," she said. "Please do." They walked for another 20 minutes, discussing logistics. Adrian would call on her 3 times a week. They would attend carefully selected social events together, small gatherings at first, where Lydia could practice being visible without the crushing weight of hundreds of eyes. He would introduce her to his circle of friends, people he trusted to be kind. "What about my parents?" Lydia asked as they circled back toward the house. "They're furious with me. They'll adjust. Your father is a businessman. He understands leverage. Right now, my interest in you gives him social capital he's never had before. He won't risk that by punishing you too severely." "And my mother?" Adrian's expression darkened. "Your mother is a different problem. She's built her identity around managing you as a damaged asset. Your independence threatens her entire worldview. She'll make me pay for today." "Probably. But Lydia, you can't let her fear control you anymore. Elizabeth did that. She bent herself into smaller and smaller shapes trying to fit into the cage our parents built. It killed her." The blunt words hit like a blow. Lydia stopped walking. "I don't want to die," she said quietly, "but I also don't know how to live like this, caught between their expectations and your promises, terrified of disappointing everyone." Adrian turned to face her fully, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Then stop trying to avoid disappointment. Stop trying to be what they want or what I want or what society expects. Just be Lydia, whoever that is, whatever that looks like." "I don't know who that is." "Then we'll find out together. That's what courtship is for." The simplicity of it made Lydia want to laugh and cry simultaneously. 18 years of hiding, and the solution was apparently just stop. "It can't be that easy," she whispered. "It won't be." Adrian's smile was rueful. "Being yourself when everyone expects you to be someone else is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But Lydia, you've already survived fire. You've survived 18 years of emotional suffocation. You're stronger than you think. Or I'm just good at enduring." Endurance is strength, just directed inward instead of outward. The trick is learning to point it at the right targets. "And who are the right targets?" His expression hardened. "Anyone who tries to make you ashamed of surviving." A window opened on the second floor. Margaret's face appeared, her expression thunderous. "I think my mother has decided the chaperoned walk has gone on long enough," Lydia said. "Then we should conclude properly." Adrian stepped back, creating appropriate distance. "May I call on you again Thursday afternoon?" "Yes?" "Excellent. I'll arrange something more interesting than garden walks. Perhaps the British Museum? They have an excellent collection of ancient manuscripts." "You want to take me to a museum?" "I want to take you places where intelligence is valued and beauty standards are irrelevant. Museums seem like an excellent starting point." Lydia felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like that." "Thursday, then?" Adrian bowed formally, the gesture exaggerated enough to be slightly mocking. "Until then, Miss Hawthorne." "Until then, Your Grace." He left through the garden gate, and Lydia stood watching until his carriage disappeared around the corner. The housekeeper cleared her throat gently. "Miss Lydia, your mother is requesting your presence in her chambers." Of course she was. Lydia straightened her shoulders, gathered what remained of her courage, and walked back into the house. Margaret waited in her private sitting room, standing by the window with her arms crossed. Her expression was cold enough to freeze water. "Sit down," she commanded. Lydia sat, folding her hands in her lap. The elaborate hairstyle was giving her a headache. The tight collar felt like a noose. "What?" Margaret said with dangerous calm. "Was that performance in the parlor?" "I spoke the truth, Mother." "The truth?" Margaret's laugh was bitter. "You humiliated your father and me in front of a duke. You contradicted us, questioned our decisions, Suggested we've somehow harmed you by trying to protect you from the cruelty you would have faced if we'd allowed you to parade your scars publicly. You haven't protected me, you've hidden me, because the alternative would have destroyed you. Margaret's control cracked. Do you have any idea what society does to women who are different, who are damaged? They tear them apart, they mock them, they reduce them to their flaws and nothing else. We saved you from that, Lydia. We gave you a chance at a normal life. Normal? Lydia stood, the word tasting bitter, standing in corners at balls. I'm dragged to against my will, suffocating in layers of wool, watching everyone else dance and laugh and live while I slowly disappear. That's not normal, Mother. That's torture. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. For the first time in 18 years, I'm actually saying what I think instead of what you want to hear. Margaret's face flushed red. And you think that Duke truly cares about you? That his interest is genuine? I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. He pities you, Lydia. Sees you as some sort of project, a damaged thing he can fix to make himself feel noble. The words struck at Lydia's deepest fears, but she forced herself to hold her ground. Maybe. Or maybe he just sees me as human, as someone worth knowing beyond my scars. Either way, it's more than I've gotten from you. Margaret's hand moved so fast Lydia barely registered it. The slap connected with her cheek, sharp and stinging. They stared at each other, both shocked. Margaret had never struck her before, ever. Get out, her mother whispered, her voice shaking. Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret. Lydia turned and fled, her cheek burning, tears finally spilling free. She made it to her bedroom, locked the door, and collapsed onto her bed. The elaborate dress was suffocating, the tight collar unbearable. With shaking hands, Lydia began unfastening buttons, peeling away layers, discarding the artificial perfection her mother had constructed. When she was down to her simple undergarments, she stood in front of her mirror and turned slowly. The scars spread across her shoulders and upper back like a grotesque map. Raised ridges of tissue that caught the light strangely, skin that had healed wrong, puckered and discolored, the permanent reminder of the fire that had killed Sarah and changed everything. Lydia had spent 18 years avoiding this view, hiding from mirrors, dressing in darkness, doing everything possible to pretend the scars didn't exist. Now she forced herself to look. Really look. Sarah had died saving her, had thrown her to safety, sacrificing herself so a 10-year-old girl could live. These scars were proof of that sacrifice, evidence that someone had loved Lydia enough to die for her. Her mother called them disfigurement, called them damage, called them shame. But Adrian had called them survival. Lydia touched the worst of the scarring, following the familiar ridges with her fingertips. They didn't hurt anymore. Hadn't hurt for years. They were just part of her history, part of her story. A story her parents had spent 18 years trying to erase. A knock sounded at her door. Miss Lydia? The housekeeper's voice was gentle. I've brought tea. Lydia threw on a dressing gown and unlocked the door. Mrs. Davies entered with the tea tray, her eyes taking in Lydia's tear-stained face and discarded dress without comment. Your mother is in a state, she said calmly, pouring tea. Your father has locked himself in his study with a decanter of brandy. The whole house is in chaos. I'm sorry. Don't be. Mrs. Davies handed her the cup. I've worked for your family for 12 years, Miss Lydia. I've watched them hide you away like some shameful secret. About time someone challenged it. Lydia blinked. You think I'm right? I think you're brave. It takes courage to stand up to your parents, especially when they've spent years convincing you that you're broken. The housekeeper's expression softened. That Duke seems like a decent man. Better than most of the aristocratic peacocks I've seen. He lost his sister to suicide. I'd heard rumors. Terrible business. Mrs. Davies settled into a chair. You know what I think, Miss Lydia? I think the Duke sees in you what he couldn't save in his sister. A chance to do right by someone who's drowning in other people's shame. My mother said he pities me. Maybe he does. But pity that leads to action is better than indifference, isn't it? The housekeeper smiled. And from what I saw in that garden, he doesn't look at you like you're pitiable. He looks at you like you're interesting. Interesting. When was the last time someone had found Lydia interesting instead of disappointing or shameful or inconvenient? Mrs. Davies, Lydia said slowly, do you think I can actually do this? Stop hiding. Learn to be myself? I think you've got no choice, miss. You keep suffocating under all those layers and you'll end up like that poor sister of his. Better to fight and fail than to fade away quietly. The blunt assessment was oddly comforting. Lydia sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. This is only the beginning. Wait until you're facing down the full weight of London society's judgment. Then we'll see if your courage holds. Mrs. Davies collected the tea tray and left, closing the door softly behind her. Lydia stood alone in her bedroom, wrapped in a dressing gown, her scarred back exposed, her future suddenly uncertain in ways that terrified and exhilarated her equally. Through the wall, she heard her mother's voice, sharp, angry, blaming. Her father's response was muffled but equally furious. They would make her pay for today's rebellion. They would find ways to punish her, to reassert control, to remind her that she was still their daughter and still subject to their authority. But for the first time in 18 years, Lydia felt something stronger than fear. She felt alive. The scars on her back burned with phantom heat, and Lydia realized with sudden clarity that she'd been carrying them as shame for so long she'd forgotten they were also proof. Proof that she'd survived fire. Proof that someone had loved her enough to die saving her. Proof that she was stronger than the cage her parents had built. Outside, storm clouds gathered over London, promising rain. Inside, Lydia Hawthorne stood in front of her mirror and made a choice. She would stop hiding, stop suffocating, stop letting fear and shame dictate every moment of her existence. Whatever came next, scandal, judgment, her parents' fury, society's cruelty, she would face it visible instead of invisible. And if she burned again in the process, at least she would burn standing in the light instead of hiding in the shadows. The first drops of rain began to fall, and Lydia watched them streak down her window, washing the city clean. Part 3 viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ. Nội trực tiếp từ câu cuối Part 2, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện. Giữ ngôi kể thứ 3, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, giọng văn giàu cảm xúc, hồi thoại chiếm khoảng 20 đến 25%, xung đột leo thang mạnh, môi trường hoặc cộng đồng trở nên nguy hiểm hơn, quyết định táo bạo của nhân vật chính dẫn đến biến cố lớn. Phần này phải chứa cú twist lớn thay đổi hoàn toàn cục diện hoặc thân phận nhân vật. Duy trì chủ đề sinh tồn, môi trường khắc nghiệt và sự đối đầu giữa nhân vật với cộng đồng hoặc hoàn cảnh. Mỗi cánh phải có mục tiêu và hậu quả rõ ràng, mỗi phần phải có một mini climax trước khi kết thúc. Không recap dài dòng, kết thúc bằng một điểm dừng căng thẳng hoặc khoảnh khắc nguy hiểm nhất của câu chuyện, không giới thiệu phần sau. Không nhắc đến Chúa, chỉ dần bắt buộc. Không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 14 giờ 17 phút, Part 3, The Battle with Society. The rain continued for 3 days, turning London's streets into rivers of mud and forcing society indoors. Lydia spent those days in her room, reading books Adrian had sent, philosophy, poetry, scientific treatises that challenged everything she'd been taught about women's intellectual capacity. Her parents didn't speak to her. Meals were delivered to her door by servants wearing expressions of careful neutrality. The silence was punishment, but it was also liberation. For the first time in years, Lydia existed without constant surveillance, without her mother's critical gaze tracking her every movement. On the 4th day, the rain stopped. By afternoon, a carriage arrived bearing the Duke's crest. Adrian stood in the entrance hall, water still dripping from his coat despite the clearing skies. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "Ready?" he asked when Lydia descended the stairs. She wore a new dress, still high-collared, still concealing, but a deep burgundy instead of her usual gray. A small rebellion, but a deliberate one. "Where are we going?" Somewhere I should have taken you first." His smile was grim. "To meet the people who will either accept you or destroy any chance we have at making this work." The carriage ride took them to Mayfair, to a townhouse that radiated old money and older bloodlines. Adrian helped her down, his hand warm and steady on hers. "This is my aunt's residence," he explained as they climbed the steps. "Lady Helena Blackwood. She's hosting a small gathering today, 20 people at most, all carefully selected." "Selected for what?" "To test you." Adrian's honesty was brutal. "Helena is society's unofficial gatekeeper. If she accepts you, others will follow. If she doesn't, then I'm finished before I start. Then we fight harder." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I won't lie to you, Lydia. Today matters. What happens in the next few hours will determine whether London society sees you as my duchess or as the scarred woman I'm foolish enough to court." The casual reference to duchess made Lydia's breath catch. "You're assuming this courtship leads to marriage." "I'm assuming nothing. I'm hoping everything." His gray eyes met hers. "Are you ready?" "No, absolutely not." Every instinct screamed at her to run back to the carriage, back to her room, back to the safe invisibility of corners and shadows. Instead, Lydia lifted her chin. "Yes." The drawing room was elegant without being ostentatious, filled with people who radiated the particular confidence of those born knowing they belonged. Conversation died the moment Adrian and Lydia entered. A woman in her 60s rose from a velvet chair. Lady Helena Blackwood had silver hair, intelligent eyes, and the kind of presence that suggested she could start or end wars with a single word. "Adrian," her voice was warm. "You're late." "Traffic was murder, Aunt Helena." He kissed her cheek, then turned. "May I present Miss Lydia Hawthorne? Lydia, my aunt, Lady Helena Blackwood." Lydia curtsied, trying to ignore the weight of 20 pairs of eyes assessing her. "Miss Hawthorne." Lady Helena's gaze was penetrating. "I've heard interesting things about you." "I hope not too scandalous, my lady." "Scandalous enough." The older woman's smile held calculation. "Come, sit. Let's become acquainted." Adrian released Lydia's arm, a gesture of trust and terror combined. She settled onto the indicated sofa, acutely aware of her heavy shawl, her high collar, the layers of concealment that marked her as different. "My nephew tells me you have a passion for literature," Lady Helena began, her tone conversational but her eyes sharp. "I enjoy reading, yes." "What are you reading currently?" The question was a trap. Answer with something too feminine, novels, poetry, and she'd be dismissed as frivolous, too masculine, philosophy, politics, and she'd be judged as pretentious. "Mary Shelley's Frankenstein," Lydia said carefully. "For the third time." Lady Helena's eyebrow rose. "Indeed. Most young women find it too disturbing. Most young women haven't spent their lives understanding what it means to be feared for your appearance rather than known for your character." The words were out before Lydia could stop them. Around the room, several people gasped. Adrian's expression flickered with something that might have been approval or panic. Lady Helena's smile grew. "How refreshingly honest." "Tell me, Miss Hawthorne, what do you make of the creature's abandonment? Was Frankenstein justified in his horror?" The conversation that followed was unlike anything Lydia had experienced. Lady Helena debated with the precision of a trained philosopher, challenging every point, forcing Lydia to defend her interpretations. Around them, other guests drifted closer, listening. 20 minutes in, a young woman with perfect ringlets interrupted. "Forgive me, Miss Hawthorne, but aren't you terribly warm in all those layers?" Her tone was sweet poison. "It must be positively suffocating." The room went silent. Lydia felt the familiar heat of shame crawl up her neck. This was it, the moment where her concealment would be questioned, mocked, exposed. "Actually," she said clearly, "I find the weight comforting, like armor." "Armor against what?" The woman's smile was cruel. "Honest conversation?" "Against assumptions." Lydia met her gaze steadily. "People see the layers and make judgments, which saves me the trouble of wasting time on those whose interest is limited to surface appearances." Several people laughed. The young woman's face flushed red. "How very defensive," she murmured. How very honest, Lady Helena corrected sharply. Miss Pemberton, if you cannot contribute meaningfully to conversation, perhaps you should find occupation elsewhere. Miss Pemberton retreated, humiliated. Lady Helena turned back to Lydia. You have courage, Miss Hawthorne, and intelligence. Both will serve you well in the battles ahead. She paused. My nephew has explained your circumstances, the scars you carry. The room's attention sharpened. Lydia's hands tightened in her lap. He has, my lady. And you're prepared for what society will say when they learn the Duke of Somerset is courting a woman with significant physical disfigurement? The bluntness was breathtaking. Adrian started to intervene, but Lady Helena raised a hand, silencing him. I asked Miss Hawthorne, not you. Lydia drew a careful breath. I'm prepared for cruelty, my lady. I've endured it my entire life. What I'm not prepared for is kindness or acceptance, or the possibility that my scars might matter less than I've been taught to believe. Lady Helena studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded, as though Lydia had passed some invisible test. You'll do, she said simply. Adrian, you've chosen well. The relief in the room was palpable. If Lady Helena approved, others would follow. The afternoon continued with lighter conversation, but Lydia felt the shift. People approached her differently now, with curiosity instead of disdain. As the gathering concluded, Lady Helena drew Lydia aside. A word of advice, my dear. Society will test you. They'll push boundaries, search for weaknesses, try to break you simply because you're different. Don't let them. How do I stop them? By refusing to be ashamed. Your scars are part of your story, not the entirety of it. Own them before others can weaponize them. The words lodged in Lydia's chest like seeds. The carriage ride home was quiet. Adrian sat across from her, watching with those penetrating gray eyes. You were magnificent, he said finally. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Lydia. It's acting despite it. He leaned forward. Helena doesn't approve of people easily. Her acceptance means you'll have protection when the real attacks begin. When, not if. Definitely when. His expression darkened. There's something I need to tell you. Something I learned this afternoon that will make the next few weeks considerably more difficult. Lydia's stomach clenched. What? Lady Pembroke is hosting a ball in 3 weeks. The social event of the season. 500 guests, everyone who matters in London society. He paused. She's specifically requested our attendance, both of us. That's good, isn't it? An invitation? It's a trap. Adrian's voice was flat. Pembroke knows about us. About your scars. She invited us specifically to create a spectacle, to put you on display in front of the entire aristocracy and watch you fail. The room seemed to tilt. 500 people. All watching, all judging. I can't, Lydia whispered. Adrian, I can't stand in front of 500 people. You can refuse. I'll send our regrets. We'll avoid the ball entirely. And confirm that I'm weak, that I'm hiding. Or protect yourself from a situation designed to destroy you. Lydia stared at her hands, feeling the familiar weight of impossible choices. Run and confirm every cruel thing society believed about her, or fight and risk complete annihilation. What would Elizabeth do? She asked quietly. Adrian's expression cracked. Elizabeth would have refused, would have stayed home and let the fear consume her. That's what killed her, Lydia, choosing safety over courage, hiding over living. Then I'm going. The words came out stronger than she felt. I'm going to that ball, and I'm going to prove that I'm more than my scars. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Yes, I do. To Lady Pembroke, to society, to my parents. She met his gaze. To myself. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Then we'll go. Together. And if Pembroke wants a spectacle, we'll give her one she'll never forget. The following 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Adrian took Lydia to museums, galleries, small gatherings where she could practice conversation and visibility. Each event was a battle, fighting panic, fighting shame, fighting the urge to retreat into familiar invisibility. Her parents remained coldly distant. Her mother barely spoke to her. Her father communicated only through servants, his disappointment a palpable presence in the house. 5 days before the Pembroke ball, everything changed. Lydia was reading in the parlor when her mother swept in, her face pale with fury. "You need to end this courtship," Margaret announced without preamble. Lydia set down her book. "No. This isn't a request, Lydia. It's a command. End it, or your father and I will do it for you. You have no authority to We have every authority. You're our daughter, unmarried, living under our roof." Margaret's voice shook. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? That the Duke is amusing himself with you, that you're a charity case, a project to assuage his guilt over his sister's death. That the moment he tires of this game, he'll discard you and marry someone appropriate." Each word landed like a physical blow. They were Lydia's own fears, spoken aloud by the person who should have been protecting her from them. "Adrian isn't like that," she managed. "Adrian is a duke, and you are a merchant's daughter with scars covering half your body. Do you truly believe this ends in marriage? In happiness?" Margaret's laugh was bitter. "You're deluding yourself, Lydia. And worse, you're making our entire family a laughingstock. I don't care what society thinks. Then you're a fool." Margaret stepped closer, her expression vicious. "Let me be clear. You will end this courtship before the Pembroke ball. You will tell the Duke that you've reconsidered, that you're not suited to his world. You will do this quietly and with dignity. And if I refuse, then your father will write to the Duke explaining that you're mentally unstable, that the trauma from the fire left you emotionally damaged, prone to delusions and inappropriate attachments. He'll suggest that Adrian's interest is being exploited by a disturbed young woman who cannot understand the inappropriateness of her aspirations." The threat was so vicious, so calculated, that for a moment Lydia couldn't breathe. "You wouldn't." "We would. We will. Unless you end this now." Lydia stood on shaking legs, facing her mother across the expensive carpet, the gilded furniture, the carefully maintained facade instead of respectability. "You're terrified," she said slowly, understanding dawning. "Not of what society thinks of me, of what happens when I escape your control." Margaret's face flushed. "How dare! You built your entire identity around managing me as damaged goods, around hiding me and controlling me, and making me believe I was too broken for anything better. But Adrian sees me differently, and if I marry him, if I escape this house and build a life you can't control, what does that make you?" "Lydia, it makes you the woman who spent 18 years destroying her daughter's confidence to maintain her own sense of power. It makes you cruel and small and desperate." The slap came faster this time, harder. Lydia's head snapped to the side, pain exploding across her cheek. "You ungrateful wretch," Margaret hissed. "After everything we've sacrificed." "You've sacrificed nothing." Lydia's voice rose, 18 years of silence breaking. "Sarah died saving me. She burned alive so I could live. And you've spent every day since convincing me that her sacrifice was wasted, that I'm too damaged to deserve the life she died giving me. Get out." Margaret's voice was ice. "Pack your things. You're leaving this house." "Gladly." "I'm not finished. You'll leave London entirely. Your father has arranged for you to stay with his sister in Yorkshire indefinitely. By the time you return, if you return, the Duke will have forgotten you existed." The pronouncement fell like a guillotine blade. Yorkshire was isolation, imprisonment, a return to the cage, but this time hundreds of miles from anything resembling freedom. "You can't force me to go. You're an unmarried woman with no income and no prospects. Where else will you go?" Margaret's smile was poisonous. "The Duke? Please. He may enjoy your company for now, but the moment you ask him for actual help, for protection beyond social calls and museum visits, he'll realize what a burden you truly are." The word struck at Lydia's deepest fears. She wanted to deny them, to insist that Adrian was different. But doubt crept in, cold and insidious. What if her mother was right? What if Adrian's interest was temporary, a balm for his grief over Elizabeth, rather than genuine care for Lydia herself? "The carriage leaves tomorrow morning," Margaret said. "Be ready." She swept from the room, leaving Lydia standing alone, her cheek burning, her world collapsing. That night, Lydia sat at her desk and wrote 3 letters. The first was to Adrian, explaining everything, Her mother's ultimatum, the forced exile to Yorkshire, the threat to poison his reputation by claiming she was mentally unstable. She sealed it carefully, addressing it to his townhouse. The second was to Lady Helena, thanking her for her kindness and asking her to watch over Adrian in whatever scandal followed. The third letter was the hardest. It was to her parents, and it contained a single sentence. I won't be exiled like Elizabeth was. She left all 3 letters on her desk, changed into her nightgown, and waited. At midnight, Lydia rose. She dressed in her simplest clothes, a dark traveling dress, sturdy boots, a cloak that concealed without suffocating. She packed a small bag with necessities, including the book of Wordsworth poetry Adrian had given her. Then she did something she'd never done in her entire careful, controlled life. She ran away. The streets of London at midnight were dangerous, filled with shadows and threats her sheltered existence hadn't prepared her for. Lydia moved quickly, keeping to well-lit thoroughfares, her heart hammering with equal parts terror and exhilaration. Adrian's townhouse was a 15-minute walk from her family's residence. She'd mapped the route during afternoon carriage rides, never imagining she'd traverse it alone in darkness. The building was dark when she arrived, only a single light burning in a lower window. Lydia climbed the front steps, raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if her mother was right? What if Adrian saw her appearance as an imposition, a burden he'd never agreed to shoulder? The door opened before she could knock. Adrian stood in the doorway, still fully dressed despite the late hour. He looked at her face, bruised from her mother's slap, and his expression transformed into something dangerous. Who hit you? His voice was deadly quiet. My mother. It doesn't matter. Adrian, I need... It matters. He pulled her inside, closing the door firmly. It matters very much. Come with me. He led her to a private study, settled her into a chair by the fire, then knelt in front of her. His fingers were gentle as they tilted her face toward the light, examining the darkening bruise. Tell me everything, he said. So she did. The ultimatum, the exile to Yorkshire, the threat to paint her as mentally unstable. Adrian's expression grew darker with each revelation. They can't force you to leave London, he said finally. They can. I have no money, no options. Where else can I go? Here. The word was simple, absolute. You can stay here. Lydia laughed shakily. Adrian, I can't live in your townhouse unchaperoned. The scandal would destroy both of us. Then we'll make it legitimate. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Lydia, I was going to wait, give you more time to be certain, but your parents have forced my hand. He turned back to face her, and in his eyes, Lydia saw determination mixed with something that looked like fear. Marry me, Adrian said. Not in 3 months or 6 months. Now. Tomorrow. We'll obtain a special license, find a minister willing to perform the ceremony, and bind ourselves legally before your parents can interfere. The proposal hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying. You're asking me to marry you to escape my parents, Lydia whispered. Not because you love me. I'm asking you to marry me because I refuse to watch another woman I care about get destroyed by family shame. Because you deserve better than exile and isolation. Because in 3 weeks of knowing you, I've found more genuine connection than I've had in 4 years of grief and guilt. He crossed back to her, kneeling again so they were eye level. I can't promise love, Lydia. Not yet. I'm still too broken from losing Elizabeth. But I can promise partnership, honesty, protection, a life where you're valued instead of hidden, seen instead of erased. And if we regret it, if we marry in haste and discover we're completely incompatible, then we'll figure it out together. But I'd rather face that uncertainty than watch you be exiled to Yorkshire to slowly disappear like my sister did. Lydia stared at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like a storm, disrupting everything she'd believed about herself and her future. 3 weeks ago, she'd been invisible, suffocating, convinced her only value was in successful concealment. Now a duke was kneeling before her, offering marriage and partnership and the possibility of a life beyond the cage. It was insane, reckless. Everything her careful nature screamed against, but Elizabeth had chosen carefully, had calculated and planned and tried to make the safe choice, and Elizabeth was dead, Yes, Lydia said. I'll marry you. Adrian's expression shifted, relief and determination and something deeper. You're certain? I'm terrified. But yes, I'm certain. He stood, pulling her to her feet. Then we moved quickly. I'll send for the special license tonight. We'll marry tomorrow afternoon, quietly, with only my aunt and a few trusted witnesses. Your parents will learn about it after it's done. They'll be furious. They'll be irrelevant. Once you're my Duchess, they have no legal authority over you whatsoever. His smile was grim. And if they attempt to spread rumors about your mental stability, they'll discover exactly how ruthless I can be in protecting my wife. Wife. The word sent a thrill of terror and excitement through Lydia's chest. What happens now? Tonight? Tonight, you sleep in the guest chambers. My housekeeper will stay with you. Propriety must be maintained until the ceremony. He paused. Tomorrow afternoon, Lydia Hawthorne, you become the Duchess of Somerset. And the day after that, we attend the Pembroke Ball together, and we show London society exactly what it means to challenge us. The audacity of it made Lydia dizzy. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. The same fierce determination that had driven her to stand up to her parents, to attend Lady Helena's gathering, to run through midnight streets to Adrian's door. The determination to survive by being visible instead of invisible. I need to tell you something, Lydia said quietly. About the scars. Before we do this, you should know the full extent. I don't need to know anything except whether they cause you pain. They don't. Not physically. Then the rest is your story to share when and if you choose. Adrian's voice was firm. I'm not marrying you despite your scars, Lydia. I'm marrying you because you're brilliant and brave, and because watching you discover your own strength has been the most remarkable thing I've witnessed in years. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. You barely know me. I know enough. The rest we'll learn together. A clock chimed 1 in the morning. Outside, London slept, unaware that in a private study, 2 damaged people had just made a decision that would change everything. Adrian, Lydia said carefully, what if I'm making this choice for the wrong reasons? What if I'm running from my parents instead of running toward something real? Then you're still running toward freedom instead of accepting imprisonment. That's reason enough. He was right. Whatever her motivations, whatever the outcome, choosing to marry Adrian was choosing herself. Choosing the possibility of a life lived openly instead of a half-life spent hiding. Tomorrow then, she said. Tomorrow. Adrian called for the housekeeper, explained the situation with professional efficiency. The older woman showed no surprise. Perhaps nothing surprised a ducal household anymore. Lydia followed her upstairs to a guest chamber that was larger than her entire bedroom at home. She changed into a borrowed nightgown, climbed into an enormous bed, and lay awake staring at the ceiling. In less than 12 hours, she would be married, would be a duchess. Would step into a role she had absolutely no preparation for, armed with nothing but determination and the fragile hope that being seen was better than being safe. Outside, she heard a carriage arrive, heard Adrian's voice issuing commands. He was already moving, already arranging the license, the ceremony, the logistics of transforming a merchant's scarred daughter into a duke's wife overnight. Lydia touched the bruise on her cheek, feeling the tender skin. Her mother's final mark. The last time Margaret Hawthorne would have physical power over her. Tomorrow, everything changed. Tomorrow, she stopped being the woman who chose to disappear and became the woman who chose to be seen, scars and all, whatever the cost. And if London society wanted to destroy her for it, let them try. She'd already survived fire. She could survive this too. Part 4. Viết sao nghìn đến sao nghìn 502, nói trực tiếp từ câu cuối Part 3, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện. Ngôi thứ 3, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, hối thoại 20 đến 25%. Nhân vật chính bắt đầu xoay chuyển tình thế. Giải pháp khác thường của họ phát huy tác dụng trong hoàn cảnh khắc nghiệt. Cộng đồng hoặc đối thủ bắt đầu nhận ra sự thật. Xung đột vẫn còn, nhưng quyền lực đang đảo chiều. Phải có một mini climax thể hiện bước ngoặt rõ ràng, không recap dài dòng, không dùng tiêu đề phụ, không nhắc đến Chúa. Kết thúc phần bằng một khoảnh khắc chiến thắng bước đầu hoặc sự công nhận đầu tiên nhưng chưa kết thúc hoàn toàn câu chuyện, chi dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 14 giờ 21 phút, part bond, resolution, the courage to be seen. Dawn broke over London with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the city's soot-stained buildings look almost beautiful. Lydia woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, her heart already racing before her mind fully registered where she was. The Duke's townhouse, her wedding day. A soft knock preceded the housekeeper's entrance. Mrs. Winters carried a breakfast tray and an expression of calm efficiency that suggested she'd orchestrated stranger situations than a midnight refugee bride. His Grace requests that you eat something, Your Grace, the woman said, then corrected herself with a small smile. Or rather, soon to be, Your Grace. The ceremony is scheduled for 2 o'clock. Lady Helena has sent a dress. Lydia sat up slowly. Already? But how did she? His Grace sent word at 1 this morning. Her ladyship responded by 4 with a complete trousseau and a rather emphatic note about propriety. Mrs. Winters set down the tray. She also sent her personal lady's maid to assist you. The Duke may be willing to scandalize society, but Lady Helena insists you do so while properly dressed. Despite everything, Lydia felt laughter bubble up. She doesn't approve? On the contrary, miss, her exact words were, about bloody times someone in this family showed some spine. Mrs. Winters poured tea with steady hands. Eat. You'll need your strength for what's coming. What was coming turned out to be 3 hours of organized chaos. Lady Helena's maid, a severe woman named Collins, arrived with enough clothing to outfit a small army. The wedding dress itself was stunning, ivory silk with minimal ornamentation, designed to be elegant without drawing attention to what it concealed. Lady Helena had this commissioned weeks ago, Collins explained as she helped Lydia into the gown. The moment His Grace began courting you, she anticipated this outcome. She expected him to propose this quickly. She expected him to do something reckless and romantic to prevent another tragedy like Lady Elizabeth. Collins's hands were gentle as she fastened tiny pearl buttons. His Grace has been half dead with guilt for 4 years. You're the first person who's made him feel alive again. The words lodged in Lydia's chest. She wanted to believe them, but doubt crept in with her mother's voice. He pities you, sees you as a project. There. Collins stepped back, surveying her work. Now for your hair. An hour later, Lydia barely recognized her reflection. The dress fit perfectly, the high neckline concealing her scars while the cut suggested elegance rather than shame. Her hair had been arranged simply, with small white flowers woven through dark curls. She looked like a bride, like someone worthy of marrying a duke, like someone other than the ghost who'd spent 18 years hiding in corners. A knock sounded. Lady Helena swept in without waiting for permission, her sharp eyes assessing Lydia from head to toe. Good, she pronounced. You look like a duchess. Now let's discuss what happens after you become one. She dismissed Collins with a gesture, then settled into a chair. Adrian explained the situation with your parents, Lady Helena began without preamble. Their ultimatum, the threat of exile, the physical violence. Her expression hardened. I've already sent word to certain influential acquaintances. By this evening, everyone who matters will know that the Duchess of Somerset bears a mark on her face from her mother's hand. Your parents' social reputation won't survive the week. Lydia's breath caught. You're destroying them? I'm ensuring they can't destroy you first. There's a difference. Lady Helena's smile was sharp. Society tolerates many sins, but striking one's own daughter violates even our flexible morality, especially when that daughter is about to become a duchess. They'll deny it. Let them try. I have 3 witnesses willing to testify they saw the bruise this morning, including my physician, who examined you at my request and documented his findings. The older woman's voice was steel. Your parents wanted to exile you to maintain control. Instead, they've given us the perfect weapon to ensure they never threaten you again. It was ruthless, calculating. Everything Lydia had been taught proper ladies didn't do. It was also exactly what she needed. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. The ceremony is the easy part. What comes after, attending the Pembroke Ball as the new Duchess, facing down 500 aristocrats who'll be waiting for you to fail, that's when the real battle begins. Lady Helena stood. Are you prepared for that? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Good answer. The older woman moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Adrian cares for you. I've known him since birth, and I haven't seen him this focused, this alive since Elizabeth died. Don't mistake his protection for pity. He's choosing you because you remind him that survival is possible. She left before Lydia could respond. At 1:30, a carriage arrived carrying Adrian's closest friend, Lord Thomas Ashford, who would serve as witness. He was younger than Adrian, with kind eyes and an easy smile. So, you're the woman brave enough to marry my brooding friend, he said when introduced. I approve already. Anyone willing to take on Adrian and society simultaneously has my eternal respect. Or eternal sympathy for my poor judgment, Lydia replied. Thomas laughed. I like her, Adrian. Don't mess this up. Thank you for that helpful advice, Adrian said dryly. But his eyes when they met Lydia's were warm, steadying. Ready? As I'll ever be. The ceremony took place in a small chapel Adrian's family had maintained for generations. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in colored light. A minister waited at the altar, his expression suggesting he'd performed stranger weddings at stranger hours. Lady Helena served as Lydia's witness. Thomas stood beside Adrian. The simplicity of it felt right. No crowds, no performance, just the essential elements of binding two lives together. The minister began the traditional words, his voice echoing in the quiet space. Lydia tried to focus on the meaning, but her mind kept drifting to the enormity of what she was doing. 24 hours ago, she'd been her parents' prisoner. Now she was becoming a duchess. Do you, Lydia Margaret Hawthorne, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Her voice came out steady. I do. And do you, Adrian James Vale, Duke of Somerset, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Adrian's gray eyes held hers. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Just like that, it was done. Lydia was married, was a duchess, had stepped irrevocably into a life she had no preparation for. Adrian lifted her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was more promise than romance. Hello, Your Grace. The title sent a shock through her system. That's going to take some getting used to. You have approximately 6 hours before we debut you to society. Use them wisely. The wedding breakfast was held at Adrian's townhouse, a small gathering that included Lady Helena, Thomas, and 3 other carefully selected guests, all people who wielded considerable social influence and who, Adrian explained quietly, could be trusted to spread the right version of events. By tonight, he said as they sat down to eat, every drawing room in London will know we married. The story we want circulating is this: passionate love match, couldn't wait for a traditional ceremony, utterly devoted to each other. And my parents? We'll learn about it when they read the marriage announcement in tomorrow's papers. His smile held no warmth. Along with the announcement that the new Duchess of Somerset will be receiving guests at my residence, not at her family's home. The message is clear. You're no longer theirs to control. Lady Helena raised her wine glass. To strategic marriages and the women brave enough to seize their own futures. They drank, and Lydia felt the weight of what she'd done settle onto her shoulders. For better or worse, she'd chosen visibility over safety. Now she had to prove she could survive it. The afternoon passed in preparation for the Pembroke Ball. Adrian had commissioned a gown specifically for the occasion, deep sapphire silk that brought out the color of Lydia's eyes. The neckline was higher than fashion demanded, but lower than her usual concealing collars, a compromise between revelation and protection. Collins worked for 2 hours on Lydia's hair, creating an elaborate arrangement that required what felt like several hundred pins. The goal, Lady Helena explained as she supervised, is to look like a duchess who chose her wardrobe, not like a woman hiding in shame. You're making a statement tonight. I am the Duchess of Somerset, and I answer to no one. What if I can't carry it off? What if I freeze or panic or Then Adrian will be there to catch you. That's what partners do. The older woman's expression softened fractionally. But you won't freeze, Lydia. You survived your parents' abuse, ran away at midnight, and married a duke in less than 24 hours. If you can do that, you can certainly walk into a ballroom. At 7 o'clock, the carriage arrived. Lydia descended the townhouse steps on Adrian's arm, trying not to think about the 500 people waiting to judge her. Breathe, Adrian murmured as they settled into the carriage. Remember, we're not performing for them. We're simply existing while they watch. That's not as comforting as you think it is. His smile was quick. Fair point. Let me try again. Lady Pembroke is expecting you to cower and hide. Instead, you're going to walk in wearing a fortune in sapphires and a ducal coronet, and you're going to make her regret ever challenging us. Better. Lydia's hands twisted in her lap. Adrian, what if someone asks about the scars? Then you tell them the truth, or tell them it's none of their business. Either answer is acceptable. He covered her restless hands with his own. You're not required to explain yourself to anyone, Lydia. You're a duchess now. They answer to you, not the reverse. The Pembroke estate blazed with light, visible from blocks away. Carriages lined the street, depositing London's elite in waves of silk and jewels. Lydia watched them through the window, her heart hammering. Last chance to turn back, Adrian said quietly. And spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done it? No. She straightened her shoulders. Let's give them something to talk about. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. Adrian descended first, then offered his hand to Lydia. She took it and stepped into chaos. The entrance was crowded with guests, all turning to see the new arrivals. Lydia felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, heard the whispers spreading like wildfire. Is that her? The Duke's new wife. I heard they married in secret this afternoon. Look at her neck, she's still hiding. Adrian's hand tightened on hers. Together they climbed the steps, and the crowd parted like water before them. Lady Pembroke waited at the top, her expression frozen between fury and forced hospitality. She'd orchestrated this ball to humiliate Lydia. Instead, she was now required to welcome the new Duchess of Somerset into her home. Your Grace, she said to Adrian, her voice acid. How unexpected. I wasn't aware you'd married. It was rather sudden, Adrian replied calmly. May I present my wife, the Duchess of Somerset? Lydia, this is Lady Pembroke. Lydia curtsied with the exact depth appropriate to her new rank, which was to say, barely at all. Lady Pembroke, as a mere viscountess, was now socially inferior. The power reversal was not lost on the watching crowd. Charmed, Lydia said, her voice steady. What a lovely ball you've arranged. I'm sure it will be remembered for quite some time. The subtle threat landed. Lady Pembroke's smile could have cut glass. Indeed. Do enjoy yourselves. They moved into the ballroom and the whispers intensified. Lydia felt eyes tracking her every movement, assessing her dress, her bearing, searching for signs of the disfigurement everyone had heard about. They're staring, she breathed. Let them. Adrian guided her toward the center of the room. We're about to give them something worth staring at. The orchestra was playing a waltz. Adrian positioned them in the middle of the dance floor, the most visible spot in the entire ballroom, and began to dance. Lydia followed his lead, her training from their first dance coming back. Around them, other couples continued dancing, but the attention remained fixed on the Duke and his new wife. You're doing beautifully, Adrian murmured. I'm terrified. I know, but you're not hiding. That's what matters. The music swelled. Lydia caught glimpses of faces in the crowd. Lady Helena watching with approval, Thomas grinning, Lady Pembroke looking like she'd swallowed poison. Then she saw her parents. They stood near the entrance, having clearly just arrived. Her mother's face was white with shock. Her father looked apoplectic with rage. Lydia missed a step. Adrian caught her smoothly, pulling her closer. I see them, he said quietly. Ignore them. They have no power here. But Margaret was already pushing through the crowd, Richard following. They reached the edge of the dance floor just as the music ended. Lydia, her mother's voice carried across the suddenly quiet room. What have you done? Every eye in the ballroom turned to watch. This was exactly the kind of spectacle society craved. A public confrontation, family drama played out for entertainment. Adrian stepped forward, placing himself between Lydia and her parents. Mrs. Hawthorne. Mr. Hawthorne. How delightful to see you at our first public appearance as husband and wife." "You had no right," Richard sputtered. "No right to marry our daughter without our permission. Your daughter is 28 years old. She required no permission." Adrian's voice was pleasant ice. "Though I appreciate your concern for her welfare. Curious timing, given that you struck her yesterday." The crowd gasped. Margaret's face went from white to crimson. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Adrian gestured to Lydia. "Show them." Lydia's hands trembled. This was the moment. The choice between hiding and revelation, between safety and truth. She stepped forward into the light and turned her face, displaying the purple bruise that marked her cheek. The ballroom erupted in whispers. "You see," Adrian continued, his voice carrying to every corner, "my wife came to me last night seeking protection from parents who viewed her as property to be controlled rather than a person to be cherished. They threatened to exile her to Yorkshire, to spread rumors about her mental stability, to destroy her reputation because she dared to choose her own future. We were protecting her," Margaret hissed, "from people like you who would use her and discard her. By striking her, by threatening her, by spending 18 years convincing her that survival was shameful." Adrian's composure cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "You're not protecting her, madam. You're destroying her, just like my parents destroyed Elizabeth. And I will not allow history to repeat itself." The silence was absolute. Then Lady Helena's voice rang out from across the room. "I can confirm everything the Duke has stated. I examined the Duchess's injuries myself this morning. I also have testimony from multiple witnesses regarding the Hawthornes' treatment of their daughter over the years." Other voices joined hers. Thomas, several of Lady Helena's influential friends, a small army of aristocratic power aligning against Lydia's parents. Richard's face mottled with rage. "You think your title protects you? Both of you? Wait until society learns the full truth about your precious wife. Wait until they see..." "See what?" The question came from an unexpected source. Miss Pemberton, the young woman who'd mocked Lydia at Lady Helena's gathering, stepped forward. Her expression was strange, conflicted. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said to Lydia, "but I've heard the rumors. About scars from a childhood fire. Is it true?" The ballroom held its breath. This was it. The moment Lydia had feared for 18 years. The moment when her carefully hidden secret would be exposed to 500 aristocrats, all waiting to judge her. She could deny it, could claim the rumors were exaggerated, could retreat back into hiding and concealment, or she could choose differently. Lydia stepped away from Adrian's protective presence. She stood alone in the center of the ballroom under the full blaze of chandelier light and made her choice. "Yes," she said clearly. "It's true." The whispers intensified. Her mother made a strangled sound. Richard looked like he might actually faint. "When I was 10 years old," Lydia continued, her voice growing stronger, "our house caught fire. My nursemaid, Sarah, died saving my life. She pushed me to safety, and in the process I was burned. The scarring covers my shoulders and upper back. It's permanent. It's visible. And for 18 years I was taught to hide it as though survival was shameful." She turned slowly, meeting eyes around the room. "My parents told me I was damaged, ruined, that no one would ever want me if they knew the truth. They wrapped me in layers of wool and shame and convinced me that invisibility was the same as safety." Her gaze found her mother's horrified face. "But they were wrong, because hiding didn't protect me. It suffocated me. It turned me into a ghost haunting my own life, too terrified to exist fully because I believed my scars made me less than human." Lydia's hands moved to the buttons at the back of her neck. Adrian started forward, but Lady Helena caught his arm, stopping him. "Let her choose," the older woman murmured. Lydia unfastened the top 3 buttons of her gown. The fabric loosened, and she lowered it just enough to reveal the top edge of her scarring, the twisted, raised tissue that marked where fire had touched her skin. The ballroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. "This is what my parents considered shameful," Lydia said. "Evidence that I survived. Proof that someone loved me enough to die saving me. A permanent reminder that I'm stronger than the fire that tried to destroy me." She refastened the buttons, her hand steady now. "I'm not ashamed anymore. Sarah didn't die so I could spend my life hiding. She died so I could live. And starting today, I'm choosing to honor that sacrifice by actually living, visible, scarred, and completely done apologizing for surviving. For a moment, nothing happened. Then someone in the crowd began to clap. It was Miss Pemberton, tears streaming down her face. "My sister has scars," she said, her voice shaking. "From smallpox. We've hidden her for 3 years, convinced her she's too ugly to be seen. But watching you—" Her voice broke. "You're right. Survival isn't shameful. Hiding is." Others began to applaud. Not everyone. Lydia could see the shocked faces, the disapproving expressions, the aristocrats who would never accept a scarred duchess. But enough people clapped that the sound filled the ballroom. Lady Pembroke stood frozen, her carefully orchestrated humiliation transformed into triumph. Adrian crossed to Lydia, his expression unreadable. For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd gone too far, exposed too much, destroyed whatever chance they'd had at a normal life. Then he took her hands and kissed them, one after the other, in full view of 500 aristocrats. "That," he said quietly, "was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed." Lydia felt tears threaten. "I may have just destroyed your reputation. You just saved it, saved both of us." He pulled her close, propriety be damned. "Elizabeth hid until it killed her. You chose differently. You chose to live." The music started again, the orchestra playing without being asked, as though the evening could simply continue after such a revelation. Adrian offered his hand. "May I have this dance, Your Grace?" Lydia took it, and they moved together onto the floor. This time, when she looked at the watching faces, she didn't see only judgment. She saw curiosity, respect, and in some eyes, recognition. Recognition of someone who'd survived impossible circumstances and chosen courage over concealment. The dance ended. Lady Helena appeared at Lydia's elbow. "Well played," she murmured. "Half the ballroom is scandalized. The other half is impressed, and Lady Pembroke looks like she might actually expire from frustration." Her smile was sharp. "You've just rewritten the rules of what's acceptable in society, my dear. Tomorrow, every woman with scars or disfigurement or anything they've been taught to hide will be talking about the Duchess who chose visibility." Is that good? That's revolutionary, and infinitely more powerful than hiding. The evening continued, but something had shifted. People approached Lydia differently now, with caution, yes, but also with genuine curiosity. Several women asked about her experience with fire. Others shared their own stories of survival, of scars they'd hidden, of shame they'd carried. By midnight, Lydia was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. She'd survived the ball. More than survived, she'd transformed it. As they prepared to leave, her parents appeared one final time. Margaret's face was devastated, Richard's coldly furious. "You've destroyed us," her mother said flatly. "Our reputation, our standing, everything we worked for, gone because you couldn't control yourself for one evening." Lydia looked at the woman who'd spent 18 years teaching her to be ashamed and felt nothing but pity. "No, Mother. You destroyed yourselves by choosing cruelty over compassion, by treating your daughter like property instead of a person. Society is turning against you not because I'm scarred, but because you struck me for refusing to be controlled." "We'll never forgive this," Richard said. "I don't need your forgiveness. I only needed your love, and you never had that to give." Lydia took Adrian's arm. "Goodbye, Father. Mother, I hope someday you understand what you lost when you chose shame over acceptance." She turned away before they could respond, walking out of the Pembroke mansion with her head high. The carriage ride home was quiet. Adrian held her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Regrets?" he asked finally. Lydia considered. She'd exposed her deepest secret to 500 aristocrats, alienated her parents permanently, thrown herself into a marriage with a man she barely knew, gambling her entire future on the hope that visibility was better than safety. "None," she said. "You?" His smile was warm and genuine. "Not a single one. You were magnificent tonight, Lydia. Absolutely magnificent." She leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "What happens now?" "Now we go home. Sleep. And tomorrow we start building the life you deserve. One where you're valued instead of hidden, seen instead of erased. That simple? That complicated, he corrected. But we'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means. The carriage pulled up to the townhouse. Adrian helped her down, and together they climbed the steps. Lydia paused at the threshold, looking back at London's glittering darkness. Somewhere out there, her parents were dealing with the consequences of their cruelty. Somewhere out there, women were discussing the Duchess who'd chosen to reveal her scars instead of hiding them. And here, standing on the steps of her new home, with a husband who saw her as human rather than damaged, Lydia felt something she hadn't experienced in 18 years. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope of someone dreaming of escape, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd already escaped and was discovering what came next. "Ready?" Adrian asked. Lydia smiled, a real smile, open and genuine and completely free of shame. "Ready," she said, and stepped into her future with her scars visible and her courage intact, choosing at last to be seen. Part 5. Viết 6.000 đến 6.504, nối trực tiếp từ câu cuối Part 4, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện. Ngôi thứ 3, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, hội thoại 20 đến 25%. Phần này giải quyết hoàn toàn xung đột, nhân vật chính chứng minh họ đúng, vượt qua hoàn cảnh khắc nghiệt và vị thế của họ thay đổi rõ rệt, cộng đồng, đối thủ hoặc hệ thống phải thừa nhận sự thật. Tạo một cao trào cuối cùng mạnh mẽ, sau đó chuyển sang kết thúc trọn vẹn, cảm xúc và mang tính biểu tượng hoặc thay đổi cuộc đời nhân vật. Không recap dài dòng, không giới thiệu phần sau, không nhắc đến Chúa. Chỉ dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Showmore 14 giờ 24 phút Part 9 From Shame to Legacy. The house was quiet when they entered, the servants having retired for the night. Adrian led Lydia through the dimly lit hallways to a private sitting room where a fire burned low in the grate. "Brandy?" he offered. "Please." He poured 2 glasses, handed her one, then settled into the chair across from her. For a long moment, they simply sat in comfortable silence, letting the chaos of the evening settle into memory. "You know what happens next, don't you?" Adrian said finally. "The letters will start arriving tomorrow. Invitations, requests for audiences, people wanting to align themselves with the Duchess, who changed the rules. Or people wanting to destroy me for it. Those too." His smile was rueful. London society doesn't adapt gracefully to change. You've just upended 18 years of their carefully maintained hypocrisy. They'll fight back. Lydia sipped her brandy, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "Let them. I'm done being afraid of what people think." "Are you? Truly?" Adrian leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because saying it in the heat of the moment is different from living it day after day. The cruelty won't stop, Lydia. It might even get worse before it gets better." She met his gaze steadily. "I spent 18 years suffocating in silence. I'd rather face cruelty while breathing freely than return to that cage, even if the cruelty destroys me." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, the careful distance he'd maintained dissolving into something warmer, more vulnerable. "You sound like Elizabeth," he said quietly. In the letters she wrote near the end, she talked about choosing truth over safety, about being tired of hiding. I just wish she'd had the courage to act on it before it was too late. She did act on it, just not the way you wanted. Adrian flinched. That's a brutal way to phrase it. It's an honest way. Elizabeth made a choice. It wasn't the choice you would have wanted for her, but it was hers to make. Lydia set down her glass. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, Adrian. You can only offer them alternatives and hope they choose differently. Is that what I'm doing with you? Offering alternatives? You're offering partnership. There's a difference. She stood, moving to the window. Outside, London slept beneath a blanket of fog. Elizabeth was alone. I'm not. That changes everything. She heard him rise, felt him approach. His reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. I need to tell you something, he said, about why I really proposed, about what I'm hoping this marriage becomes. Lydia's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. I'm listening. When Elizabeth died, I made a promise to her memory. That I would never again stand by and watch someone suffocate in shame. That if I ever encountered someone drowning the way she drowned, I would do everything in my power to offer them a different path. He paused, choosing his words carefully. When I met you, when I saw you hiding in that drawing room, wrapped in layers that were slowly strangling you, I saw Elizabeth. Saw the same desperate attempt at invisibility, the same crushing weight of other people's shame, and I couldn't walk away. So you did pity me. The words came out flatter than Lydia intended. No, I recognized you. There's a difference. Adrian turned her gently to face him. Pity is looking down at someone and feeling sorry for their weakness. Recognition is seeing yourself in someone else's struggle and understanding exactly how hard they're fighting just to survive. His hands were warm on her shoulders. I'm not saving you, Lydia. You saved yourself the moment you chose to run. I'm just offering you companionship on the journey out of the cage, and hoping that somewhere along the way we both learn how to actually live instead of just surviving. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. What if we fail? What if this partnership doesn't work and we make each other miserable? Then we'll have tried something brave instead of settling for safe. That's worth the risk. His smile was gentle. But I don't think we'll fail. I think we're both too stubborn to let that happen. She laughed despite the tears threatening to fall. Stubborn is one way to describe it. Determined, courageous, magnificently unwilling to accept defeat. Adrian brushed a strand of hair from her face. Take your pick. They all apply. The moment stretched between them, intimate and fragile. Then Adrian stepped back, creating appropriate distance. It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow starts the real work. What work? Transforming outrage into action. If you're going to challenge society's treatment of scarred women, you need a plan. Something concrete that channels all this attention into lasting change. The idea took root immediately, growing from seed to full vision in seconds. Lydia's mind raced with possibilities. A refuge, she said slowly, for women with disfigurements, somewhere they can go to escape families who hide them, to learn skills, to support each other. Adrian's expression lit with understanding. A sanctuary. Yes, that's perfect. But it would cost a fortune, require property, staff, ongoing funding. I'm a duke, Lydia. I have several fortunes. And now that you're my duchess, so do you. His smile was quick. Start planning. I'll handle the logistics. She wanted to protest that it was too much, too ambitious, impossible. But looking at Adrian's face, seeing the hope there, the possibility of turning grief into purpose, she found herself nodding instead. All right, let's build something that makes survival less lonely. The next morning brought exactly what Adrian had predicted. Letters, dozens of them, delivered by servants wearing expressions of bewilderment at the sheer volume. Lady Helena arrived at 10 with a strategic assessment. You have 43 invitations to various social events, 16 requests for private audiences, 8 letters of support, and, she paused, her expression darkening, 12 letters of condemnation, including 3 from prominent religious figures claiming your scars are evidence of moral failing. Lydia felt the familiar shame try to creep back in. She pushed it down firmly. Let me guess. They believe the fire was punishment for some childhood sin? Something along those lines. Complete nonsense, of course, but dangerous nonsense. Lady Helena set down the stack of letters. They're trying to reclaim the narrative, to paint you as shameful again, just from a different angle. How do we counter it? By ignoring them entirely. Engaging gives them legitimacy they don't deserve. The older woman's smile was sharp. Instead, we focus on the women who are already responding to your example. She produced another letter, this one written in shaking handwriting. This arrived this morning from a woman named Catherine Morris. She's 25, scarred from a carriage accident 3 years ago, hidden by her family ever since. She's asking if the rumors are true, if the Duchess of Somerset truly revealed her scars publicly. If so, she wants to know if there's hope for women like her. Lydia's throat tightened as she read the letter. The desperation in every line, the barely concealed hope that perhaps invisibility wasn't the only option. There are more, Lady Helena continued, at least a dozen similar letters. Women who've been hiding for years, suddenly wondering if they might have another choice. We need to respond to all of them, Lydia said immediately. Personally. Let them know they're not alone. That will take weeks. Then it takes weeks. These women have been invisible for years. The least I can do is acknowledge their existence. Adrian appeared in the doorway, dressed for writing. The Times is running a story about the ball. Front page. Mostly positive, though they're calling you controversial and unprecedented. Better than shameful, Lydia replied. Much better. He crossed to her side, reading over her shoulder. Is that from Catherine Morris? You know her? I know her father. He's a baron, very concerned with appearances. When Catherine was injured, he immediately pulled her from society. I heard rumors he was considering sending her to a convent to avoid the embarrassment of having a scarred daughter. Rage flared hot in Lydia's chest. He can't do that. She's not even Catholic. He can do whatever he wants. She's unmarried, financially dependent, legally powerless. Adrian's expression was grim. Unless someone intervenes, Lydia stood abruptly. Then we intervene. Today. I want to meet her. Lydia, you said I needed a plan to channel this attention into action. Here's my plan. We start with Catherine Morris. We offer her sanctuary, support, proof that there's life beyond hiding, and we document everything so that other women know this option exists. Lady Helena's expression showed approval. Ambitious, possibly reckless. I like it. It could backfire spectacularly, Adrian warned. If Morris refuses to let Catherine speak with you, if the girl isn't ready for this kind of visibility, if, Lydia faced him squarely. I spent 18 years living in fear of if. I'm done. Catherine wrote asking for hope. I'm going to give her an answer. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll arrange a meeting, but we do this carefully, with full awareness of the risks. Agreed. The meeting was arranged for 2 days later at a neutral location, a tea room Lady Helena frequented, private enough for discretion, but public enough to prevent scandal. Catherine Morris arrived looking terrified. She was small, blonde, with bandages visible beneath the high collar of her dress. Her mother accompanied her, a severe woman who radiated disapproval. Your Grace, Mrs. Morris's curtsy was perfunctory. I must say, I'm surprised you requested this meeting. My daughter's situation is delicate. All the more reason to meet, Lydia replied calmly. She turned to Catherine. Thank you for coming. I know this took courage. Catherine's voice was barely audible. You really did it? Showed your scars publicly? I did. Why? The question was desperate, genuine. Lydia chose her words carefully. Because I was tired of letting fear control my life. Tired of believing that survival was something to be ashamed of, rather than celebrated. She paused. And because hiding was killing me slowly, piece by piece, until I wasn't sure there was anything left worth saving. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. That's exactly how I feel, like I'm disappearing. You don't have to. Lydia leaned forward. That's why I wanted to meet you. To tell you that invisibility isn't your only option. Mrs. Morris interrupted sharply. Your Grace, I appreciate your concern, but Catherine's situation is different from yours. You had the advantage of a duke's protection before revealing yourself. Catherine has no such safety. She could. The offer hung in the air. Mrs. Morris's expression hardened. Are you suggesting my daughter leave her family? Move into your household like some sort of charity case? I'm suggesting she deserves the choice. The opportunity to decide for herself whether hiding is worth the cost. Lydia met the older woman's hostile gaze steadily. Right now, you've made that choice for her. I'm simply offering an alternative. We've protected Catherine. You've imprisoned her, just like my parents imprisoned me. Lydia's voice was firm, but not cruel. I understand why. Society is vicious to women who are different, but teaching our daughters that they're too damaged to be seen doesn't protect them. It destroys them. How dare you judge our parenting? Mother, please. Catherine's voice, though quiet, cut through the tension. She turned to Lydia, her expression desperate and hopeful in equal measure. What are you offering? Truly? A sanctuary. A place where women with scars or disfigurements can live without shame, where they can learn skills, support each other, exist without constant hiding. Lydia's voice grew stronger. It doesn't exist yet. We're still planning it, but you could help us build it, be one of the first residents, help shape what it becomes. And in return? In return, you'd have to be brave, be visible, help prove that women like us deserve more than invisibility. Catherine's hands twisted in her lap. I don't know if I can. The scars, they're terrible, worse than you might think. Show me. The request was bold, perhaps too bold. Mrs. Morris gasped in outrage, but Catherine, after a moment of hesitation, reached up and carefully unwound the bandages at her throat. The scarring was extensive, burns that covered the left side of her neck and jaw, puckered skin that pulled at the corner of her mouth. It was visible, yes, significant, but not the monster Catherine had been taught to believe it was. That's what I've been hiding for 3 years, Catherine whispered. That's why my father wants to send me to a convent, why my mother won't let me leave the house. Lydia reached across the table, taking Catherine's hand. It's proof you survived a carriage accident that could have killed you. It's evidence that you're stronger than fire. It's not shameful, it's honorable. Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks. You really believe that? I know it, because I've carried similar scars for 18 years, and I've finally learned that the shame belongs to the people who taught us to hide, not to us for surviving. Catherine turned to her mother. I want to do this. I want to help build the sanctuary. Mrs. Morris's face was pale. Catherine, think about what you're saying. Once you reveal yourself publicly, you can never go back. Your reputation will be honest instead of carefully constructed. Catherine's voice was stronger now. Mother, I'm 25 years old. I've spent 3 years locked in our house, watching life pass by through windows. I can't do it anymore. I won't. Your father will never allow it. Then he'll have to disown me, because I'm leaving either way, to the Duke's sanctuary or to a convent. At least the sanctuary offers me a choice in who I become. The conversation that followed was tense, filled with Mrs. Morris's protests and Catherine's quiet but unwavering determination. Finally, the older woman capitulated. Fine, but when this experiment fails, when society destroys you, don't expect us to take you back. Catherine's smile was sad. I won't, because I finally understand that you never wanted me back. You wanted the daughter I was before the accident, and she's gone. This is who I am now. She left with Lydia and Adrian that afternoon, carrying a single bag of belongings and wearing an expression that mixed terror with exhilaration. Over the following weeks, more women came. Some arrived with family support. Others, like Catherine, had to choose between sanctuary and family entirely. Each brought her own story of survival, her own scars, some visible, some hidden beneath clothing, all carrying the weight of years spent believing they were too damaged to deserve full lives. Adrian purchased a large estate on London's outskirts, close enough to the city for access but far enough for privacy. The house was enormous, with room for dozens of residents plus staff. We'll need teachers, Lydia said as they toured the empty rooms. Women who can teach practical skills, sewing, bookkeeping, languages, things that could lead to employment. I'll hire them, Lady Helena offered. She'd become instrumental in the sanctuary's development, using her connections to secure funding and legitimacy. I know several women who'd be perfect, intelligent, kind, and utterly disinterested in society's beauty standards. Catherine proved invaluable in the planning. She understood intimately what women needed after years of hiding, not just practical support, but emotional healing, space to be angry, permission to grieve, the freedom to exist without constant performance. We should have a garden, she suggested during one planning session, somewhere private where residents can go outside without worrying about being seen. I haven't felt sunlight on my face in 3 years. I didn't realize how much I missed it until yesterday. Lydia added it to the growing list of requirements: garden, library, private bathing facilities, common areas for gathering, individual rooms for privacy. The sanctuary was evolving from abstract concept to concrete reality. 6 weeks after the Pembroke Ball, they held a quiet opening ceremony. 15 women attended, The first residents, ranging in age from 17 to 53, burns, accident scars, birthmarks, conditions they'd been told made them unmarriageable and therefore worthless. Lydia stood before them in the sanctuary's main hall, her hands folded to keep them from shaking. "I don't have a grand speech prepared," she began. "I'm not even entirely sure what to say. 6 weeks ago, I was standing in corners at balls, wrapped in wool, convinced that hiding was the same as surviving." She gestured to the women gathered around her. "But you've all taught me something important. Survival isn't enough. We don't deserve half-lives spent in shadows, watching other people live while we slowly disappear. We deserve full lives. Messy, complicated, visible lives where our scars are part of our stories, but not the entirety of them." Several women nodded. Catherine smiled encouragingly. "This sanctuary exists to help us reclaim those lives, to give us space to heal, to learn, to discover who we are when we're not constantly performing invisibility. It won't be easy. Society will judge us. Our families might reject us. We might fail spectacularly." Lydia's voice grew stronger. "But even if we fail, at least we'll fail while trying to live instead of succeeding at slowly dying. And that, I think, is worth every risk." The first months were difficult. Several residents struggled with the transition from hiding to visibility. 2 returned to their families, unable to handle the weight of public exposure. Others thrived, discovering talents and interests they'd never been allowed to explore. Catherine became Lydia's closest friend and most trusted advisor. Together they developed programs, welcomed new residents, and slowly built a community of women learning to exist without shame. Lady Pembroke, predictably, launched a campaign against the sanctuary. She published editorials claiming it encouraged women to be immodest, to reject family authority, to pervert natural order. Several religious leaders joined her crusade, preaching sermons about the dangers of female independence. The attacks intensified after a prominent magazine published an interview with Lydia, complete with illustrations showing her scarred shoulders. The reaction was explosive. Half of London society declared her an inspiration. The other half called her immoral. "They're saying you're corrupting young women," Adrian reported one evening, reading from a particularly vicious editorial, "teaching them to reject shame and modesty." "Good," Lydia replied. "Shame and modesty have kept women imprisoned for centuries. It's about time someone taught rebellion instead." He looked at her over the newspaper, his expression unreadable. "You've changed. The woman I met 6 months ago would never have said something that bold." "The woman you met 6 months ago was barely alive. This is who I am when I'm not suffocating." Adrian set down the paper, crossed to her side. "I like this version better. She's terrifying and magnificent in equal measure." "Just terrifying when you disagree with her?" "Especially then." His smile was warm. "Lydia, there's something I need to tell you about us, about what this marriage has become." Her heart stuttered, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm listening. When I proposed, I promised you partnership, honesty, protection. What I didn't promise, what I wasn't capable of promising then, was love." He took her hands gently. "But somewhere between watching you stand up to your parents and seeing you build this sanctuary, somewhere between terror and triumph, I fell in love with you." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "Adrian, you don't have to respond. I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that this stopped being about saving you from your parents or honoring Elizabeth's memory. It became about choosing you. Every day. Because you're the bravest, most brilliant person I've ever met." The words unlocked something in Lydia's chest, something she'd been holding carefully protected, too afraid to examine. "I love you too," she said quietly. "I think I have for weeks. I just didn't know if I was allowed to, if this marriage was supposed to be practical instead of passionate." "It can be both." Adrian pulled her close, his arms warm and steady around her. "It should be both." They stood together in the quiet study, holding each other, and Lydia felt the final pieces of her carefully constructed armor fall away. She'd spent so long hiding, first from society's judgment, then from her own vulnerability. But here, in Adrian's arms, she could finally let herself be fully visible. Not despite her scars, not in spite of her history, but because of everything she'd survived and everything she'd chosen to become. The sanctuary's first anniversary brought an unexpected visitor. Margaret Hawthorne appeared at the gate on a cold November afternoon, looking older and considerably less sure of herself than Lydia remembered. "May I speak with you?" her mother asked when Lydia met her in the entrance hall. "Please, just for a few minutes." Lydia led her to a private parlor, her emotions carefully controlled. They hadn't spoken since the Pembroke ball. Her parents had made several attempts at reconciliation through intermediaries, but Lydia had refused all contact. "Why are you here?" she asked once they were seated. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "Because I've been reading about the sanctuary, about the women you've helped, about—" her voice cracked. "About the daughter I lost because I was too ashamed to see what I was doing to you. You didn't lose me. You drove me away." "I know." Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. "I know that now. Your father and I, we thought we were protecting you, keeping you safe from the cruelty we knew society would inflict, but we became the cruelty instead." Lydia said nothing, waiting. "After you left, after the scandal, we lost everything. Your father's business connections dried up, our invitations stopped. People who'd been friends for decades refused to acknowledge us." Margaret's voice was hollow. "We became the social pariahs we'd spent 18 years trying to prevent you from becoming. And you think I should feel sorry for you? No. I think I should apologize. Beg your forgiveness, though I don't deserve it. Tell you that I was wrong. About the hiding, about the shame, about everything." Margaret met Lydia's eyes, and in them, Lydia saw genuine devastation. "I destroyed my daughter because I was too afraid to challenge society's judgment, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life." The apology landed with complex weight. Lydia had imagined this conversation countless times, her mother's recognition, her parents' regret. In her imagination, it had always felt triumphant. In reality, it just felt sad. "I appreciate the apology," Lydia said carefully, "but it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase 18 years of teaching me to be ashamed. I know, but perhaps—" Margaret hesitated. "Perhaps it could be a beginning, not of forgiveness necessarily, but of understanding, of letting me be part of your life again, even if only at a distance." Lydia studied her mother's face, seeing the genuine remorse there. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the clean break she'd made, but another part, the part that had built a sanctuary for women learning to heal from family shame, understood that reconciliation was possible even when forgiveness felt impossible. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "but on my terms, with boundaries. And only if you're willing to truly change, not just apologize. And anything, I'll do anything." "Then start by visiting the sanctuary, meeting the women here, understanding what your shame costs not just me, but dozens of women like me." Lydia's voice was firm. "If you want to be part of my life, you need to understand why this work matters." Margaret nodded, tears still falling. "I will. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for not shutting the door completely. Thanks, Sarah, not me. She's the one who taught me that love means sacrifice, not control. I'm just finally learning what she knew all along." The conversation ended shortly after. Margaret left with a promise to return, to try, to do better. Whether she would follow through remained to be seen, but Lydia found she could live with the uncertainty, could accept that some relationships might heal imperfectly rather than remain broken completely. 3 years after the Pembroke ball, the sanctuary had grown beyond Lydia's wildest imagination. 67 women now called it home. 3 satellite locations had opened in other cities. A small publishing venture allowed residents to write and distribute their stories, creating a growing library of survival narratives. And on a bright spring morning, Lydia stood before an audience of 200 people, donors, supporters, residents past and present, to announce the sanctuary's most ambitious project yet. "For 3 years," she began, her voice carrying across the assembly hall, "we've provided refuge for women society taught to hide. We've offered safety, support, the opportunity to heal and grow. But refuge alone isn't enough. True change requires transformation, not just of individuals, but of the systems that harm them." She paused, looking across the crowd. Catherine stood in the front row, now the sanctuary's assistant director. Lady Helena sat beside Adrian, both wearing expressions of pride. Even Margaret was present, seated near the back. She'd become a regular visitor over the past year, slowly learning to understand the damage she'd caused. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Foundation for Visible Survival. Its mission is simple: to challenge every law, custom, and social practice that treats physical difference as shameful, to advocate for women's rights to education, employment, and autonomy regardless of appearance, to ensure that no daughter is ever again told that survival makes her unworthy. The applause was immediate and thunderous, but Lydia raised a hand, silencing them. This work will be controversial. We'll make enemies. We'll likely bring more attacks than we've already faced. She smiled. But I spent 18 years being invisible to avoid controversy. I'm done hiding, done accepting that some women deserve full lives while others deserve only shadows. She reached for the fabric at her shoulders, the light shawl she still sometimes wore out of habit rather than necessity. With deliberate movements, she removed it completely, standing before 200 people in a dress that revealed the full extent of her scarring. These scars are proof that I survived fire, that someone loved me enough to die saving me, that I am stronger than everything that tried to destroy me. Her voice rang with conviction. They are not shameful. They are not damage. They are part of my story, and I will not hide them anymore. The applause that followed was deafening. People rose to their feet, donors, residents, supporters who'd spent years watching Lydia transform from a frightened woman in layers of wool to a leader who refused to accept society's limitations. Adrian crossed to her side, taking her hand. That, he murmured, was the speech Elizabeth needed to hear but never got the chance to deliver herself. Lydia squeezed his hand, emotion tightening her throat. Then we'll deliver it for her, for all the women who didn't survive long enough to fight back. The foundation launched to immediate controversy. Conservative publications called it dangerous. Religious leaders preached against it. Lady Pembroke organized a formal opposition campaign, but others rallied in support. Women who'd been hiding scars for years came forward to share their stories. Prominent writers and intellectuals endorsed the foundation's mission. Small donations flooded in from working-class families who'd witnessed their own daughters being hidden away. The movement grew beyond anything Lydia could have orchestrated alone. It became a national conversation about beauty, worth, and what society owed to women it had taught to disappear. Not everyone changed their minds. Some families continued to hide their scarred daughters. Some communities remained hostile to physical difference. Change came slowly, grudgingly, through battles fought one conversation at a time, but it came. 5 years after the Pembroke Ball, Lydia stood in the sanctuary's garden, now a sprawling green space where residents gathered to feel sunlight on skin they'd been taught to hide. Catherine was there with 3 new residents, showing them the gardens, teaching them that visibility didn't have to mean vulnerability. Adrian found her there, carrying their 8-month-old daughter in his arms. Little Elizabeth, named for the sister he'd lost, had his gray eyes and Lydia's determination. She reached for her mother with chubby hands, and Lydia took her gently. "She's going to be remarkable," Adrian said softly, watching his daughter, just like her mother. "She's going to be free," Lydia corrected. "Free to exist without shame, to be exactly who she is, scars or no scars." She kissed Elizabeth's forehead. "That's what we've built here. Not just a sanctuary, but a world where she doesn't need one." They stood together in the garden, surrounded by women who'd chosen visibility over safety, courage over comfort. The afternoon sun illuminated scars and smiles in equal measure, proof that survival could be beautiful, that strength came in forms society had tried to erase. Lydia thought of Sarah, the nursemaid who'd died saving a 10-year-old girl. Thought of Elizabeth, Adrian's sister who'd chosen death over a life spent hiding. Thought of all the women throughout history who'd been told their scars made them shameful, their survival something to conceal. And she made a silent promise to all of them. Their sacrifices would not be wasted. Their stories would not be forgotten. The world that had tried to erase them would be transformed, piece by piece, until no woman was ever again taught that visibility was dangerous and invisibility was safety. It wouldn't happen overnight. It might not even happen in Lydia's lifetime, but it would happen, because she'd learned something essential in her journey from the woman who chose to disappear to the woman who chose to be seen. Courage was contagious. One visible woman inspired another, who inspired 10 more, who inspired 100. And eventually, invisibility would stop being survival and become the true death. The sun set over the sanctuary, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the main hall, residents gathered for dinner, sharing stories, supporting each other, existing fully and without apology. Lydia stood at the threshold, her daughter in her arms, her husband beside her, her scars visible in the fading light. She'd survived fire twice, once as a child when flames scarred her body, and again as an adult when shame nearly destroyed her soul. Both times, she'd emerged stronger. Both times, she'd chosen to live instead of merely exist. And that choice, renewed daily in the faces of the women she served, was the truest victory of all. Not the defeat of her enemies, not the transformation of society's cruelty into acceptance, but the simple, revolutionary act of surviving with dignity, loving without shame, and teaching the next generation that scars were proof of strength rather than evidence of weakness. Sarah's sacrifice had given Lydia life. Elizabeth's tragedy had given her purpose. And now, standing in the sanctuary she'd built from survival and courage, Lydia was giving that gift forward, to Catherine, to the 67 residents, to her daughter, to every woman who'd ever been taught that hiding was safer than being seen. The stars emerged one by one above London, and Lydia Hawthorne Vale, Duchess of Somerset, founder of the sanctuary, bearer of scars and builder of legacies, finally allowed herself to rest. Not because the work was finished, but because she'd learned that survival required more than fighting. It required joy, love, the quiet moments between battles where you stood in gardens with your family and felt sunlight on scarred skin and knew, absolutely knew, that choosing visibility had been worth every risk. She had burned, she had survived, and she had transformed that survival into something that would outlive her. A legacy of courage that proved, once and for all, that the women society tried to hide were the ones most worth seeing,